So I've been doing this podcast now for about 5 years, a little over 5 years, 5.5 years, actually. We started in January of 2021. We've covered hundreds of different guests on this show and covered a ton of different topics, and really enjoy having this tech agnostic viewpoint. And it's really drawn in a great community of people that are interested in the no BS side of digital transformation. The podcast is designed for people that want to learn the honest truth, the brutal honesty, and the good, the bad, the ugly behind digital transformations without the vendor spin. And every so often, I like to look back at what were those most engaging interviews, what were the best clips, and the things that I liked the best throughout the years of doing this podcast. And so, what we want to do today is talk about my top 10 list of the best discussions that I think we've had over the last 12 months of doing this podcast. So, this episode is going to cover a lot of different stuff, which is great. If you're interested in that big picture view, this is a really good one to listen to, because we'll do a flyover view of some of the best clips from some of the best guests that we've had on the podcast. We'll talk about stuff ranging from SAP implementation best practices to Industry 4.0 and manufacturing. We'll talk about some of our views on the different vendors in the industry and some of the ones we think are the strongest in certain categories. We'll talk about change management. We're going to talk about cost uncertainty and escalating costs of cloud and AI solutions. We'll talk about the ERP industry in general. Like, where is the industry headed? How are the different vendors faring in this new world that we live in? We'll talk about rip and replace. We'll talk about why, in some ways, ERP is dying. Just a lot of stuff we're going to cover in episode 277 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 277. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of a company called Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And as I mentioned at the intro here, this podcast is a tech-agnostic view of digital transformation. So we're not here to sugarcoat things. We're not here to sell you anything. We're just here to talk about what we think executives, leaders, and project team members need to know and understand as part of their digital transformation journeys. And today we're going to unpack my top 10 favorite clips from this podcast over the last 12 months. Now, I've based this on two different criteria. One is just the topics and the guests that I thought were most compelling, and also the ones that you thought were the most compelling based on the number of views and the engagement of that particular episode. So it's sort of yes, it's my top 10, but I've also had some heavy influence from the audience as well in this. And so we're going to count down these top 10 clips, and in each clip, I'll share with you where to find the full episode. If you want to go back and listen to the full interview, I'm going to share with you the highlight of that interview, but then I'll also share with you which episode you want to go back to listen to. And any of these clips you hear about today, you'll be able to find at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can find all 276 plus episodes of this podcast on that website. So just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can subscribe there on whatever platform you want. You can also just go pick off specific episodes you might want to listen to or watch. You can go do that all at transformationgroundcontrol.com. So with that all being said, let's jump into the top 10 list here. So my number 10 on my list is a segment from episode 271, just a few weeks ago, episode 271, where I talk about global SAP lessons learned. We talk about some of the lessons from a big SAP implementation, some of the trade-offs that had to be made around the global template versus a localization or a secret sauce at the local level. And joining me for this interview and this topic was and is Karim Saliba, who is a director here at Third Stage Consulting. He's also a former client of ours, who we actually met during his SAP implementation for a large client of ours several years ago. He has since joined Third Stage as a consultant and continues to lead some of our SAP implementations for our clients. So let's jump into this clip, because this former client turned consultant gives a pretty candid insider account of a large global rollout. And some of the lessons that I like from this interview include switching system integrators mid-project, switching from a big four to a smaller, more nimble partner. something you don't hear about often, but even a big company may find that the big four is too much, too much complexity, too much cost, too much risk, lack of control on the client's part, and just a lack of flexibility. So in this case, he went from a big four to a smaller, nimbler partner. And then we also will talk about, in this interview, we talk about the warning not to lose your company's secret sauce identity in the name of best practices, fit to standard, global templates, all that conformity that's expected in the SAP world today. And we'll talk about all this and more. So let's jump into the clip with Karm Saliba talking about best practices and lessons from global SAP implementations.
My name is Karm Saliba. The funny accent that you hear is because I grew up in South Africa. I've been living in the US for about 10 years now, but I grew up in South Africa. I am an industrial engineer. I've spent my entire career, 23 years in industrial manufacturing, so large-scale global manufacturing companies, starting with automotive and then moving on to more refrigeration, cooling, that sort of thing, global industrial manufacturing. And my career has really been spent at the place where business process meets technology. So from machines to software to hardware, but really where those tools come into play within the business process, and making sure that the business process fits and achieves the goals that the company has set out for themselves. So yeah, and then I joined Third Stage a little while ago, so I'm new to the consulting world. But yeah, so far it's been a blast. Really enjoying it.
Yeah, interesting. You have interesting background, kind of sort of 3 chapters of your career. It seems like you've got the business engineering one, the chapter where you get into the SAP stuff, and now the 3rd chapter getting into consulting, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a nice evolution.
Yeah, you get to see it all. So so tell us a little bit, I guess, before I get into some of the questions I have for you. And by the way, any questions the audience has, please drop those in the chat. Love to hear from you as well. And also, just if you don't mind dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from today too. We'd love to hear where in the world you're joining. But before we get into some of the questions I've got for you and the audience has for you, just tell us a little bit about the project itself. Could you just set us up or give us a backdrop of what the project was and how it came to be?
Yep. So the company is a global manufacturer in evaporative cooling equipment, and global company, factories all around the world, footprint in every continent. And really the company was growing very, very quickly, as many companies are, especially in that space now, growing very, very quickly, 2-3 times the size that they were a few years ago. And as a result, obviously, they want to harmonize their business processes across operations and across regions. But as many companies, they kind of grew in a way where the systems didn't necessarily grow with them. So they had a lot of outdated systems, different systems from all around the world. So they wanted to get together and really put together a plan to have global business processes and really leverage the latest technology in the best way that they could. So that was the project, and that's what we started out to do, with the goal of improving the products and services to the customer, and really the customer experience was the main goal.
Right. And how did you get looped in? Not, you didn't start off as an SAP guy. You didn't grow up. I assume you didn't grow up aspiring to be an ERP project manager someday.
I did not. I wanted to be an inventor. So I don't know how I got here. But yeah, I've always been a process guy. So that's always been my thing, optimizing business processes, whether it's a process on the factory floor, or whether it's an operational process, or whether it's a sales process, or anything like that. So I then got into innovation and did some education around innovation and innovation methodologies and how you can frame problems, before jumping to solutions, and how you can really apply solutions that will solve the problem that you're going after. And so I kind of had that background, which was known within the organization. And then a particular gentleman who was the CIO at that stage said, "Hey, would you be interested in helping us frame a problem that we're kind of trying to get our head around here?" So I said, "Sure, that sounds like fun." So I started doing that, and then before we know it, I was leading the global SAP implementation. But it evolved. It evolved from trying to solve a business problem to implementing the solution that we came up with, and then it kind of became a natural fit for me to keep going with it.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. And so not something you meant to do, but you stumble into it. You take over this project, and I imagine, I guess, how did it feel? Like, how was the beginning months of that project? I'm just curious. Like, you're I imagine you're drinking from a fire hose, trying to figure out what the hell SAP is and what
Yeah.
is this whole ERP thing? How do I manage a project like this? It's probably a bit different than what you've done before.
Yeah.
How are those early days or weeks or months of transitioning? How did it feel?
Chaotic and scary. It was always the intent for the business to do as much as possible themselves. Bring in support from consultants and system integrators, but really to truly own the process of the transformation. And as a result, we recruited a lot of great people from within the business. And brought them onto the team, and they also didn't know anything about SAP. Nobody within the business, none of the business units were on SAP, so SAP was brand new to us. Primarily, we were on a PeopleSoft instance and a few smaller ERPs and CRMs around the world. So nobody knew anything. We all got swept up in a lot of the sales talk from SAP about how easy it is and how seamless it is, and a lot of the sales talk from system integrators that it'll take a few months and it'll be over. So we didn't know what to believe, what not to believe. We didn't have a structure or much of a game plan. We did know what we wanted to achieve and what our guiding light is, which I think was helpful.
Yeah, that right there. I mean, that last part of what you said, I imagine that was a lifesaver in many ways, just to have those guiding principles and direction you wanted to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you look at this project that you led, it was tell us a little bit about the scope, if you don't mind. It was
Sure.
not just S/4HANA, but there
No.
were certain nuances to it that made it unique.
Yeah, absolutely. So S/4HANA was obviously the kind of single source of truth, the back end or backbone ERP, but it was really all encompassing. So we implemented C/4HANA, which is SAP's CRM, CPQ, which is their configuration price quoting engine, commissions module, field service management. I'm trying to think what else, Concur. So it was really soup to nuts, right? We're all the way from CRM through product selection, configuration, ordering, manufacturing, shipping, finance, obviously, supply chain, warranty, quality, lock, stock, and barrel. We were all in.
Yeah. And when you look back at it now, with the benefit of hindsight, what was the single hardest lesson? If you had to pick one thing that was just the hardest lesson of managing not just a complex ERP implementation, but one that was global in nature like that, what would that lesson be?
Honestly, I think that there's two parts to it. I think that there's a huge people aspect to it. I mean, other than the technology change, and we were implementing, all those modules together. We were the first company to do that around the world. There has been no one else, at least at that time, that was using advanced variant configuration with CPQ integrated with C/4HANA and all the rest. So apart from the technology, there's a huge people aspect to it. And one of the big lessons is, really create relationships early within the organization. Really understand who the key players are within each function and within each region, and spend time with them. Really spend time genuinely getting to know them, what their concerns are, and what their goals and ambitions are. So I think that's really important. And then the other one, I hate the word governance, Eric. I really do, because for me, it's just be organized. Right, that's governance. Be organized. Have a process for how you want to manage things like scope items and change requests and defects and requirements. Because before you know it, there's going to be thousands or tens of thousands, and you can't manage tens of thousands of items in the same way that you manage 50 or a few hundred. Right. So set out a process for how you will manage each of those items, and then have a system beneath it to be able to manage them. Because they're going to run away from you very quickly, and it's far more difficult to clean up than it is to do it right the first time. So those are two things that I think I learned kind of the hard way over all of this.
Yeah, I love that second one too. It's cheaper, easier, faster to do it right the first time than to go clean up stuff later. And we see a lot of clients that, and I know you now as a consultant are seeing that on our side at Third Stage Consulting too. How true that can be. Yeah,
absolutely.
Here's an interesting question from Third Stage. Actually, we know them. We work for them. Third Stage Consulting, or someone from Third Stage Consulting on YouTube says, "What shocked you the most about this first project? Is there anything that just sort of not blindsided you, but just it really opened your eyes, really surprised you, or maybe is a little bit more difficult than you thought it would be?"
Yes. So we had gone at that stage with one of the big five system integrators, for SAP. And what shocked me the most, and I think continues to shock me, sort of 6 or 7 years later, is how many promises are made by many companies around methodology and process that they'll come in with and implement immediately. And it's all kind of smoke and mirrors to an extent. Yes, there is methodology somewhere hidden deep down inside a filing cabinet somewhere, but it's not as cookie cutter as one might think to implement some of these processes. So that was a shock to me. I would have thought that these multi-billion-dollar companies would have it down, they'd have a recipe, but there isn't really one that I've seen.
Yeah. That's interesting. And you guys, I mean, maybe talk about that for a second. You guys started with a large Big Four system integrator, and then you switched midstream. Can you tell us a little bit about that, like how that came to be and how that transition worked out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the company is a legacy company. They've been around for 80 plus years, and with a company that's that big, a billion-dollar company, there's a lot of inertia, obviously, when you're making a change like this, and when you partner with another very big company or even bigger company, you've got to manage your own inertia as well as theirs, and that can become quite difficult. So with large companies and large system integrators, there's a lot of red tape. There's only so much you can escalate. And so when you do run into problems, and you inevitably will, regardless of how good they are, and they certainly brought a lot of good, right? I don't want to make it sound like it was all negative, because it wasn't. There's a lot of inertia that you've got to manage. You've got to talk to this team, you've got to speak to this person, and then they've got to escalate. And so we switched to a much smaller partner, or a couple of smaller partners, kind of halfway through the project. And many people thought we were nuts. Like, how can you, towards the end of blueprinting, switch system integrators? You guys are lunatics. But it worked out for the better, because they were a much better fit. They were more agile. They were more nimble. They were able to pivot much faster than some of the bigger system integrators had.
Right. Yeah, super interesting. And that seemed to work out well for you guys, right? To switch to that smaller integrator.
It did, especially with what we set out to do, which was to own as much of it as possible. You want a partner that is looking out for your success and that wants you to own it at the end of the day, as opposed to a company that's trying to take as much of it as possible from you.
So that was my interview with Karim Saliba, talking about global SAP lessons. And I'd love to hear what resonates with you. Anything that jumped out from what he said. I know he talks about a lot of good stuff there in that discussion. And by the way, if you want to hear the entire discussion, be sure to go to episode 271 of this podcast. You can hear the whole interview in its entirety. We just played you a short clip there, but there's a lot more that he dives into with me in that conversation. So be sure to check that out. Episode 271. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, or if you're watching on YouTube or whichever platform you're listening or watching to this podcast, you can just go search up 271 as the episode number. So coming in at number 9 of my top 10 favorite interviews of the last 12 months is an interview I had with Jeff Winter, talking about manufacturers and what they need to know about Industry 4.0. This is a really interesting topic. Jeff is a guy that I've known for years now. I've followed him for a long time. He's a very well-known, well-respected thought leader and practitioner in the manufacturing space. And he is on the show talking about operational data and AI, as well as the 3 things that manufacturers get wrong. And so we'll talk through this with him. If you don't know Jeff, he's a marquee guest with about 100 million LinkedIn views. He's got a really fresh perspective on Industry 4.0 and manufacturing. And he reframes Industry 4.0 as an era of industrial revolution across the whole industry rather than any single company's change. He also warns that AI applied on top of fragmented operational data just amplifies weaknesses that are already there. And he delivers a memorable diagnostics that companies wrongly label everything transformation and then treat it like a project. So the project's closed, the transformations persist. So he's a very quotable expert, and all this stuff that we talk about here with him is very directly useful to manufacturers and distributors. So here's a clip from my interview with Jeff Winter talking about manufacturing and Industry 2.0. And this, by the way, is from episode 265 of Transformation Ground Control. The question is whether we haven't been on the verge of technological business change for 15 years from the definition of the Revolution 4.0. And it's kind of what you're saying is like, we've been doing this. It wasn't like we just shifted over to now we're in Industry 4.0, the pieces were getting laid and organizations were moving along towards that path.
Well, this is where you also start to differentiate between how we define transformation. So let's also take a step back. An industrial revolution is a change in the entire industry, not the change in any one company. And a lot of people get that confused. You can have a company, let's say, achieve a level 5 or level 6 on those scales in every single category, and they are the most advanced company in the world. But if the other 99.99999% of companies don't achieve that, then the industry didn't transform. So this is the difference between an industrial revolution is when enough companies change. And so as enough of them change, the whole industry as a whole changes. So we have to separate out the industry movement versus individual companies movement. So if you look at that, there are some companies that are doing fantastic, unbelievable, futuristic things. They are in the minority. And this is where you look at it and go, there are some companies that even say in 2026, oh, we haven't done Industry 3.0 yet. Well, if you're still around in 2026, you survived the third industrial revolution. You may not have changed a thing, but you survived it. You're still here. A lot of companies went out of business. So the amount of necessity for what your company needs to do to barely get by is different in your industry, your company, and whatever your goals are. But the fourth industrial revolution, Industry 4.0, is changing the way that companies have to strategize, invest in what they have to build. So I would argue any company you have today versus any company you have 15 years ago, they are doing stuff differently. And a lot of it is a pretty big difference. Now, is it to the level of the German high-tech strategy vision that was, the picture that was painted? No, but they are doing things massively different than they were doing 15 years ago.
Michael on LinkedIn has a question for you, Jeff. What role will knowledge graphs play in that convergence?
Huge amount. So this is where, as you start to move up your levels of intelligence, as you do this, you start to understand more things of being able to identify it, being able to know what it is, being able to know what caused it, and then being able to know what it will cause as you kind of move up. And really, the only way to get to higher levels of intelligence is relational understanding. Otherwise, just a standard database won't give you that relationship. It may give you a hierarchy, but it won't let you know what is related to what. And as you're trying to build an intelligent factory, a truly intelligent factory, you need to understand it's not a database, it's a system. And these systems are complex. I mean, you have to think. Material goes into assets. Assets are constrained by maintenance. Quality issues propagate across lots, and decisions that are made over there impact stuff that's made over there. That's not captured in a traditional database. Really, you have to use knowledge graphs in order to capture all these relationships, and then use the knowledge models to what you apply the AI onto, so you can better understand how AI decisions will propagate across all those systems, rather than just optimizing an isolated use case.
Yeah. Very cool. So I'm going to ask you a question about what organizations are getting wrong when they start their digital or smart factory journey. But before I get to that, though, do you mind just giving us a quick intro / 101 crash course on what is a smart factory? How do you simplify that, or just summarize what a smart factory is?
Well, this is where there is no universal definition for it, just like Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0, I like to generally describe as a description of our era. It's more about the revolution that is occurring across all companies, not any individual company. Smart manufacturing, or the intelligent factory, or intelligent manufacturing, or you can kind of pick whatever you want to call it, is more of a smaller view of a description of the capability gained within the function of manufacturing, as opposed to Industry 4.0 can apply outside of manufacturing as an industry, or outside of it as a function. It can apply to supply chain. It can apply to engineering. It can apply to things that don't, directly relate to the actual production of what you're making. Okay. So this, once again, there is no universal definition for it. There's probably 10 different ones depending on what you want to do. There are IEC standards and ISO standards that attempt to define it. There are government agencies that attempt to define it. But I view it as oversimplified as smart manufacturing is your ability to have information in real time as to what is going on everywhere across your production so that you are able to make decisions faster against that particular data. It's being able to take your decision latency, the amount of time it takes you to identify, to be able to interpret, agree, and act, and take that and shorten it as short as possible. In order to do that requires a bunch of technology, a bunch of changes in processes, different roles. It changes a lot. So now you end up having an intelligent factory at the end where your decision latency is almost zero from when things go wrong or when things go right.
Interesting. So what is it that you see manufacturers most commonly getting wrong when they start on this journey or on this path toward smart factory?
Great segue. And part of it is because that's a high level, I'll call it inspirational definition, but it doesn't provide any clarity of purpose. So this is where I'd say there's really three interrelated ideas that would make it here. The first is clarity of purpose. The second is everything being labeled transformation. And third is transformation being treated like a project. So starting with clarity of purpose, it's really hard for companies and leaders to describe what their factory looks like at the end of any sort of transformation journey. Smart manufacturing. Hey, we're building a smart factory. I'd say poor companies have no answer, like not companies that aren't doing it well. Good companies can explain the new capabilities that are gained at the end, but they can't actually describe how those capabilities translate into a new way of working, how the factory is different than when it was before. That includes everything from operating models to processes to roles. They're just describing we have a new capability that our factory can do. But when I challenge to go, great, how does that capability change the way that you manufacture? And it becomes really hard to answer. I mean, I've done this just within the past 2 weeks where I ask companies and to go, great, so you have a digital transformation journey within your manufacturing. You're trying to build an intelligent factory at the end. Describe what that factory looks like once it's all done. Tell me what it looks like. How are things different? That is very difficult for companies to articulate and agree upon. And it gets back to they have a definition at a high level, which everyone agrees and nods, but they don't know how to take that down into all the decisions that have to be made on a daily basis so that we're all working towards the same thing. The second is everything gets labeled transformation. So I really don't know any companies that haven't gone through a digital transformation already or aren't in the middle of a digital transformation right now. And regardless of how you define what it is or what the outcome is, I view it as the big thing here is most of these companies take that transformation initiative and then they turn it into projects, we'll call it, and everything gets labeled then transformation, and it's pointing towards that particular objective that they have. And I view it as that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for a couple of reasons. One, you might find out, I was dealing with one company that had a digital transformation initiative, and it was comprised of over 860 some projects, and realized like 80% of them weren't transformative. They were just modernization, optimization, just basic foundational projects that need to be done. But if you grade all 860 as a transformation, you're going to grade them wrong. You're not going to get the success that you want, and it won't lead to the transformation that you really need. Now, I bet you there's only a few of those that are truly transformative, that change the way that you work, that change the way that you create or capture value. I bet you a lot of them are just necessities that need to be done in order to enable a transformation. And then the third is treating transformation itself like a project or a collection of projects. So having 860 projects may not be the best way to do it because each one then gets treated as its own self-contained entity that needs to be on time, on budget, and not disrupt particular things. And when you do that, you miss the connection across all of them. You miss the fact that, but number 362 can't happen unless you do 118 first. And 118 also allows 6 other things. And it's once those are allowed that you can really transform. So if you treat it like that, then you're going to stall. And this is why there are a lot of famous studies out there like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Everest Group that have high levels of digital transformation failures, 60, 70, 80%. But then KPMG in 2022 came out with a study that said 99% of digital transformation projects return 1% ROI or higher. 99%. That means people are spending money and they're getting something back for it, but they're not hitting their objectives.
Yeah.
So how can you have 70% failure and 99% return, in investments? And it's because they're labeling the projects wrong, and they're treating it in the wrong way. A transformation project has very different KPIs than a modernization project. And I view it as, if you treat your transformation like a project, projects close, transformations persist.
Yeah.
Projects deliver artifacts. Transformations change operating models. Now, don't get me wrong, projects are needed in there, and a transformation will include projects, but don't turn it into a collection of projects. Otherwise, you lose the strategy between them and the interconnectedness.
That's super interesting. I mean, even going back to the first point you just made in your response there around manufacturers needing to define and agree on what they want to be when they grow up. What is this going to look like, or what do we want to become? How do we want this to look?
What does it do? Not just the capability. Oh, we now can do predictive maintenance. Great. How does that change?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Manufacturing.
Yeah. Yeah. How does that better service your customers? How does it make it more profitable? Whatever KPIs you're tying it to. That's really interesting. And it's fundamental. What's interesting about what you're saying is it's true for it's not just a manufacturing thing you're bringing up.
Right.
This is just a more broad, any sort of change initiative an organization, even outside of manufacturing, might be going through. I think everything you're saying is very relevant to
For that answer, yes, it's applicable to all industries.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you see as and this is somewhat related to the previous question, but what do you see as the biggest disconnect between executive expectations and what's actually happening on the plant floor, especially when they're going through these transformative projects / initiatives?
From an expectation point, I would say it's to move fast, and it's because technology evolves fast. And that puts a sense of urgency and a sense of fear on executives to either capitalize on it as a advantage, or just to not fall behind as a disadvantage. But factories are not software environments. They're physical systems with regulatory constraints, quality requirements, legacy equipment, and deeply embedded operational practices. And changing them takes time. And so the disconnect often comes from leaders expecting rapid, visible progress while the plant floor is dealing with data integration, process redesign, training, cultural change, which are the real work of transformation. So
Right.
that would be the biggest one, is the speed. And the second is the vagueness of how to use technology. And I'm going to use AI specifically. I don't know of a single executive out there that isn't telling their team to figure out how and where to use AI.
Yeah. Just
But
figure it out.
they know how to actually give guidance on what specifically to do with it and what they're attempting to get out of it. So now you have pressure to use a technology with no real intended purpose.
Right.
Why are we using it?
Right. Right. Yeah. That's super interesting. I mean, it's your comment about AI and the executives that are just throwing out this, let's go pursue AI. It gets back to the previous points you're making, which is, okay, AI is great. All this technological stuff you've talked about so far is great, but why? Why are you doing it? Not because it's not a good idea, but help understand or help articulate why you want to do this and how it's going to improve your business, your customer experience, your employee experience, whatever it is, whatever objectives you're trying to accomplish.
And with that, I'll add, it was interesting. This was about 2 years ago when I did this more, when generative AI was super new and interesting, is I met with quite a few executives of manufacturers. And I learned real quickly that they had a facade of understanding AI, but no real deep understanding. Now, I don't need executives to have a in-depth technical understanding, but they do need to understand just enough to know what it can do. Because here's a test I gave one particular manufacturer with the CEO and his direct reports, so the highest level of a $10 billion manufacturer. And I used a hypothetical, and I basically said, okay, let's assume we had a ChatGPT for your company, and all the company's data was perfectly integrated, perfectly contextualized. All the collective knowledge and experience of the company was at your fingertips in this new generative AI, interface, ChatGPT for your company. What would you ask it? And I gave them as an exercise to go, give me the 3 questions that you would ask it. And I did that. And then the next day we came back and we reviewed the answers. And what I basically found is this exposed that they don't really understand the technology. And if they don't understand the technology, how are they going to be able to guide their teams? Roughly 50%-ish of the answers that they picked out of there were things that had nothing to do with generative AI. They were basic classical machine learning that we've been able to do for like 10, 15 years. Like, if that's what you're using it for, there's nothing generative about that except a prettier interface. The actual meat behind it is machine learning. We've been able to do that for years. There was about 25% that was like a perfect use case. I'm like, this is a great example of how you should be using it. And 25% were just completely wrong. They either exposed ethical boundaries, not intentional, but just not what you should be using it for, or a complete misunderstanding of like, that's not possible today. Maybe one day in the very far future, but like that can't work. And so then you think about it, only 25% were like good use cases that these executives would actually use it for. How good do you think their AI strategy is going to be if that's their understanding of what generative AI can do?
So that was my discussion with Jeff Winter talking about manufacturing and Industry 4.0. That full interview segment can be found at episode 265 at transformationgroundcontrol.com. So be sure to check that out. And then coming in at number 8 is a topic that I did as a solo cast, or at least this segment was a solo cast that did not have a guest in this particular part of the podcast, but it's where I talk about how best practices do not exist. So this is where I talk about the myth of ERP best practices. This is something that I talk about a lot. It comes up on this podcast quite a bit. And really the whole theme here is to challenge vendor best practice marketing, because it's something that's been around for 10, 20 years or more. And it's something that's very misleading. I think the term best practice is extremely misleading, especially if you're talking about business best practices from a software vendor perspective, because software vendors build software a certain way. They hope and want that to be best practice. But the reality is there's no single definition of what best practice is. All that matters is what is best practice for you. So that's really the nuance here that I want to talk about. And this contrarian point is that no two manufacturers operate similarly enough to use vanilla off-the-shelf software without changing or customizing the software. So standardized best practices, even if they did exist, that promise breaks down in practice. And so let's chat through this segment here where I talk about how best practices do not exist. So you have this new generation of manufacturing technology providers that are, in my opinion, taking some market share away from the established incumbent ERP vendors that also focus on the manufacturing space. Another example would be QAD. QAD is an ERP solution that's been around for, I believe, like 30 years. It's been around for a long time, focused almost solely on the manufacturing space, very heavy in automotive, food manufacturing, and some other areas. But they've made a really interesting overhaul of their tech stack and just their overall strategy, still focused on manufacturing, still focused on what they've always focused on in that they're building technology for manufacturers. But what's different with QAD now is that they're providing more of a native AI solution and more solutions built for frontline workers. So rather than just focusing on back office types of stuff that a lot of ERP vendors tend to be really heavy in, like, for example, if you look at some of the big tier one providers, they're pretty solid when it comes to the back office stuff like financials and inventory management, even, your basic supply chain type of stuff. But they haven't always been very user friendly from a shop floor perspective. And this is where we sort of cross over from ERP into manufacturing execution systems, or MES systems. And companies like QAD, as an example, is one that is focusing more heavily on frontline workers and making their jobs easier and providing technologies that are easier and simplified, not overly complex or cumbersome like a lot of the bigger ERP systems. And so QAD is another example. And by the way, Third Stage Consulting is not affiliated with any of these software vendors. I'm just speaking from an objective perspective here of what we're seeing some of our clients implement. But QAD is a really interesting technology that I'll be curious to keep an eye on them and see where they go in the manufacturing technology space, because I think they've sort of bridged the gap between your traditional ERP functionality or ERP focus and combined it, or sort of they're walking in this gray area now of moving more towards MES and shop floor automation that a lot of ERP providers that are out there now can't really provide solid solutions for without some sort of MES bolt-on or shop floor automation bolt-on to go with it. So very, very interesting trends that we're seeing in the space there. So I mentioned Acumatica, QAD. You've got obviously the big three with SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft. And then of course you've got all the other, MES providers that are out there that are providing very, very solid solutions. And that's another area to think about as well. And these are just software solutions we're talking about, or traditional ERP systems, I guess you could say. But then you also have other technologies like AI. Obviously, is a big trend, a big buzzword right now. And then if you look at on the MES side, as I was alluding to, some ERP vendors, like I said, I mentioned QAD has some sort of MES-ish capabilities, but then there's other providers out there like Infor, even Oracle NetSuite provides some manufacturing MES type of capabilities. Pretty light, I'd say, not going to be as scalable for a large complex manufacturer, but they do have some capabilities there, especially if you look in their partner ecosystem of third party versions or third party applications that have been built on the Oracle NetSuite platform. You can find some systems out there that provide more robust supply chain management and manufacturing types of solutions. Epicor has an MES system. Plex Systems is another one that I think we talk about them in the manufacturing distribution report as well. A lot of these systems that I'm mentioning, you can read about in that report that I mentioned here, and I'll pop it up on the screen here in just a moment, so you can download that as well. And then there's also companies like VAI Software is another one that provides pretty robust manufacturing capabilities. And I could go on and on. There's Aptian, there's others as well. And there's kind of a convergence now where you've got ERP providers that are trying to provide manufacturing capabilities, but they can't be everything to everyone. So they tend to have some deficiencies or gaps, generally speaking, in their MES and manufacturing capabilities. And then you've got these other niche providers that maybe provide really deep manufacturing solutions. They may not be as good at the financial reporting and the consolidation and some of the back office traditional corporate type of stuff. And so that's the big trade-off that manufacturers have to make is, do we take it this sort of best of breed composable approach where we find different pieces of software that can work best for our manufacturing organization, or do we just accept the fact that we're not going to get everything we want out of one platform and accept the capabilities and limitations that are there? And that's what we see a lot of times with, for example, SAP. A lot of companies, I'll pick on both SAP, S4HANA, and Oracle Fusion here because they both have the same problem, in my opinion, is they're relatively new or newer solutions within each of those vendor communities. And they just haven't had the time or the R&D dollars to yet catch up to what their legacy versions of the software had in terms of manufacturing depth and capabilities, especially when you get into things like you get into advanced planning and some of the more complex engineer to order manufacturing needs or workflows that an organization has. A lot of times SAP, S4HANA, Oracle Fusion don't have the depth that Oracle EBS or SAP ECC once had. And so on one hand, some of these incumbents or these larger ERP vendors that have been around for a long time, since back in the on-premise days, on one hand, they're creating these newer solutions that have more advanced capabilities in some ways, like with the AI stuff, the agentic AI, the analytics, some of the general automation and RPA and stuff like that. But on the other hand, they're missing some of the functionality that they had in terms of depth and detailed workflows and exceptions and things that could really enable different types of manufacturing organizations. And this is especially true. And this is something that's a big deal, I think, for manufacturers, especially. It's a big deal for all industries, but I'd say probably manufacturing more than any. And this is more of a call it a warning sign trend more than anything. But that is that, these cloud solutions and this big push to the cloud where SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, all these guys are pushing hard to get as many of their customers as possible onto cloud and ideally, in many cases, public cloud or multi-tenant cloud solutions like SaaS solutions. With that comes less flexibility than what manufacturers had with their on-premise systems. And it's not good or bad. I'm not here to say cloud is good or bad. I'm not here to say on-premise is good or bad. But that is a trade-off that we're seeing a lot of manufacturers struggle with right now, which is how do we get the capabilities we need? How do we take advantage of some of the the new technologies that are out there, the new processes and workflows that are enabled by these new technologies, and how do we ensure that we're not hamstrung or limiting ourselves, limiting our options in the future. So those are all important things that we need to have at the top of our minds as well. And that's the big trade-off. The big $1 million question is, how do we navigate that? How do we move towards this future-proof concept, which, by the way, it's a cringy word for me. It's a trigger for me, but I'll still use it anyway, just because the industry loves to talk about it. How do we future-proof our manufacturing operations, even though there's no such thing? But how do we get more technologically advanced without creating limitations to our operations? Because I think right now in manufacturing, we're seeing a big conflict between manufacturing needs and complexities and diverse sets of operations versus the standardized vanilla approach that software vendors are pushing. Because if you think about it, software vendors are going to gain and benefit and be able to scale their solutions much better if everyone conforms to a standard set of processes, a standard set of workflows, a standard set of capabilities. The more complex and more diverse the organizations are out there, the more it sort of breaks their model or makes it more difficult to scale their solutions, because now you've got more workflows, more complexity, more things you've got to manage. And the reality of manufacturing, though, is that no two manufacturers that I've ever seen operate similarly enough that they could be using the same solution off the shelf out of the box without any sort of material changes or customization to the software. So that's the big problem I think manufacturers have. And I think manufacturers, more than any other industry, need to really take ownership of their transformation and think long, hard, strategically, and deliberately about what exactly they're committing to long term. Because the decisions you make today, the contracts you sign today, the implementation you commit to today is not only going to affect you in the short term in terms of risk, time, cost, resources, et cetera, and also in terms of operational disruption if the go live doesn't go well, but maybe even more importantly, it's going to affect you long term. So you're getting into a situation where in these cloud contracts, you're more locked in than ever, you're more committed than ever to these software vendors, and switching or moving away from them in the future is going to be more difficult than ever. And we have yet to see that big wave of manufacturers who have outgrown their cloud solutions try to now move to a new cloud solution that better fits their needs as they grow and evolve. And that day is coming. I don't know when it'll be. We're still 5, 10, 15 years away from that first wave of manufacturers that say, hey, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this system was a good fit. It worked well for us for a certain amount of time. Now the technology has gone up one direction, our business has gone another direction, and we've outgrown the software. And now there's this delta or this gap and this tension between what we have versus what we need. And they're going to have to replace those cloud systems. And when that day comes, it's going to be really difficult for a lot of these companies to switch. So it's inevitable. It's going to happen. I'm not saying that you need to predict the future and buy the solution that's going to prevent that in its entirety. But I think the more flexibility you can build into your model is the better. And that typically is going to entail more of a composable approach to where you don't have vendor lock-in with one single vendor. It does freak me out a little bit. It'll scare me a little bit to see a manufacturer that just doubles down on one vendor, goes all in on a cloud contract, long-term contract with escalating costs, and with no control over what that functionality turns into or how that functionality evolves. Because you think about it now, when you're in the cloud solution, the vendor doesn't need to ask your permission, or you don't necessarily need to approve an upgrade to the software. The upgrades are happening more frequently, and it's not necessarily going to align with what you need as a business. And it's not necessarily going to be something that's not disruptive to your business too. So that's the really big, tricky part of being in manufacturing, and especially against the backdrop of the tech space here today, is that there's a push in technology towards standardization, vanilla solutions, but manufacturers are becoming more complex, are becoming more global. Product customization and product, there's a better word that I'm blanking out on right now, personalization of products. That's the trend in manufacturing. Manufacturing in general, from what we're seeing, is not moving towards a more vanilla world where more manufacturers are just operating more like one another. If anything, they're diverging and they're operating differently. And that's a natural phenomena. I think that's healthy phenomena. It's a free market, and there's global economies and global organizations that are going to evolve and try to create their own competitive advantages. And they're not going to be able to do that by using standard vanilla software. And I think that's the the promise that's the flawed promise that software vendors offer you when they say you're going to future-proof your business, you're going to get rid of your technical debt. What they don't share is that you're actually, in some ways, creating more problems and complexity and cost longer term. And so having a real deliberate strategy behind you to move into the future, knowing that you can't just sit still, you can't just sit on your legacy system forever, but doing things on your timeline, doing things that fit your needs, not a vendor's needs necessarily. Those are all important. And that's how we help our clients, by providing that objective client side, client facing advisory, trusted advisor role. So I want to get to a couple audience questions here. Craig on LinkedIn says ISA 95 is still a useful framework for parsing out who's who and what's in IT or operations technology. Even with AI, I'm closely following the MCP server and unified namespace concepts, which I believe help with plug and play. And that unified namespace is really interesting, that unified namespace concept, because anything that gives you more flexibility, more openness, more opportunities for integration, I think is generally a good thing. And if you look at what some vendors are doing, and I'll pick on SAP because they make it so easy to pick on them as a product and as a company. If you look at SAP, they're doing the opposite. They're trying to get as much of a footprint established within organizations, which is their prerogative. I mean, that's their business model, and that's fine. I'm not faulting them for pursuing their own profitability and profit motives. But I think a lot of times what buyers don't realize, especially from manufacturing organizations that don't have super sophisticated or super knowledgeable IT staff that understand both business and technology, a lot of those decision makers don't realize that when you move towards a closed ecosystem or a vendor lock situation, you're actually limiting your options, and unified namespace sort of runs counter to that. And I think that's a good option, or a good framework or methodology for how manufacturers can counter that. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. It's not the only way. And I know there's some unified namespace purists out there, and people, they're zealots or just super passionate about that particular concept. And I'm not here to, again, I don't have a dog in that fight, but the dog I do have a fight in is the fact that whatever's best for a client, whatever they need, whatever fits their strategy and where they're going and their operations, I think that's the key thing there. So thank you for your comment there. So that was a segment from episode 261 of Transformation Ground Control, where I talk about how best practices do not exist. You can find that entire episode, or that entire discussion, along with more content in that episode, in episode 261 of Transformation Ground Control. So we've covered 3 of the top 10 so far. We've got 7 more to get to. This is our top 10 ranking of the top 10 interviews and topics on this podcast over the last 12 months. We're going to get back into the top 7 here after a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you only attend one event this year, make it Digital Stratosphere 2026. It's our annual flagship conference. It's going to be September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado, the same location as we held it last year. It's 3 days where digital leaders, ERP practitioners, and transformation experts come together for no-spin, vendor-neutral conversations on ERP, AI, and digital transformation. There's no marketing fluff. There's no pay-to-play sponsorships, just real practitioners sharing real lessons. Go to thirdstage-consulting.com/stratosphere to learn more and register. Tickets are limited, and these always sell out, and I'd love to see you there. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 277. My name's Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And we are counting down the top 10 interview segments from this podcast over the last 12 months, based on what I think and the topics I thought were most enjoyable and the guests that I thought were most enjoyable, along with your feedback, your views and engagement with each of these episodes. And so we based it a bit on my favorites, but introduced a dose of how the audience responded to each of the episodes as well when formulating this list. So number 7 on our top 10 list, top 10 interviews of the last 12 months on this podcast. Episode 255 had a segment about ERP awards. And this is where we tried to celebrate some of the software vendors in the marketplace. Sometimes we can be a little critical. Maybe some might think we're a little harsh of software vendors. So this was a year-end sort of thing that we did at the end of 2025. We thought it'd be kind of fun to do a little award ceremony for different categories, different things that a lot of these software vendors are really good at. And so this awards format was with Greg Benton, who's our chief strategy officer here at Third Stage Consulting. It was a pretty lively, quotable rundown of vendor strengths and weaknesses. We had about 20 different categories. It was a pretty fast-moving, opinionated tour of the marketplace that might give you some good school or food for thought. I also, in this episode, talk about how your ERP system is making you weaker. And I do that by talking through how Michael Porter's 5 forces model, if you remember that from business school, Michael Porter's 5 forces industry model talks about how industries are constructed and how companies can create a competitive advantage by reducing some of those negative forces that decrease your competitive advantage. And in this discussion, I talk about how ERP systems actually work against you if you look at it through the lens of Michael Porter's 5 forces model. So I thought it was a good way to really show and make you think about, why are we implementing ERP? Are we implementing just because, or because we really think we're going to become more competitive as an organization? And if you frame it differently that way, you come up with different answers. So really want to chat through the award segment, though. But if you do want to hear that discussion around Porter's 5 forces, go back to episode 255, where you can find that discussion, as well as this full discussion around the ERP awards of 2025. You can't talk about enterprise tech without talking about the most AI-driven ERP platform. All the vendors are talking about it. They all are investing heavily in AI. It's sort of a nuclear arms race, it seems like, to who can build the strongest platform with the best data and the best AI capabilities to really get to this utopia of AI. And let's start with the runner-up. The runner-up is a software vendor you've all probably heard of. It has advanced AI and machine learning tightly integrated into its ERP system, particularly strong in finance and analytics. And that runner-up is Oracle Fusion, or Oracle Cloud ERP, I should say. I still call it Fusion, but Oracle Cloud ERP. So that's the runner-up for being most AI-driven. And the winner of most AI-driven platform is SAP S/4HANA. And that is because, first of all, it has the broadest AI fabric embedded across S/4HANA, finance, supply chain, and industry solutions at a global scale. And I think the big thing that both SAP and Oracle both have going for them is just their sheer scale. The fact that they are used across so many big organizations, and they are, at least in the case of SAP, and I believe it's true for Oracle as well, SAP has gotten tens of thousands of their customers to agree to opt into sharing their data and using it to train Joule and other aspects of SAP's AI models. And so I think that alone gives them a unique advantage that a lot of other software vendors aren't going to have. Not to mention the fact that SAP customers have so much historical data, and they've been on SAP in many cases for decades now. So you've got these big, massive global organizations that have been using SAP forever, and now you've got all this data that's being trained to train the SAP AI models. And that gives SAP a pretty unique leg up, and maybe to a slightly lesser degree, Oracle as well. So what's your knee-jerk reaction to that, Greg? Any thoughts, comments on that?
Well, I do think that being AI driven is something that all of the ERP vendors and all of the edge solution providers are working toward. And when you showed our top 10 list, it's really apparent that AI is driving a lot of that top 10 decision process, right? Especially as we look at how that is becoming a part of the fabric of the ERP systems, as well as just being able to interoperate various systems, including legacy systems, right? So now we're looking at the ERP, or digital operations, for an organization as an entire ecosystem connected very actively by AI. So vendors can't afford to fall behind. And that is one of the reasons why we ranked the top 10 in the top 10. So just amazing with the advent of AI. And you're right, we're all saying it too much, right?
I know.
I got to see that blooper reel where you say AI like 1,000 times.
I'm actually going to publish it, because what's even funnier is it's number one was AI. And then number two, you might appreciate this because you and I know each other well. The number two word that I most commonly use in my podcast is So it shows me saying AI, AI, AI. And then it says number two, the number two most commonly used word in your podcast is So it's me just going, and so that.
And as we all know, with AI and transcripts, that comes up all the time. So
I know. I wish it was smart enough to know.
It's terrible.
You need to make me look smarter by taking out the but AI has not figured that out yet. And see, I just did it again. See, now I'm self-conscious of my So here's the, actually, I meant to show you this earlier. Here is the QR code to download our 2026 ERP report. So a lot of these vendors are talking about in these different categories, like the one we just discuss, the most AI-driven ERP platform, the top 10 rankings, pros and cons of different systems, as well as general industry trends. You can find that in that ERP report. So be sure to scan it here. I'll drop it in the comments as well. You can download that and read that for free on our website. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that. But it's a really good report that our team put together. So please check it out and let us know what you think. Want to get to a couple other quick comments, and then I'll turn it over to you, Greg, for the next category, the next winner in the next category. We have, let's see, Paolav on YouTube says, I'm digital transformation in Thailand for enterprise company. We use Oracle for headquarters and composable model with Boomi Connect to leave Cal Software ERP. So
interesting.
Yeah, so you're getting into a category we're going to get to later, which is composable ERP. Integration is going to be a theme we talk about here today. So thanks for that feedback. That is something we look at too. And I think that's why it's so hard now to say just what are the top 10 ERP systems or what are the best ERP systems, because those lines are blurring so much between traditional ERP and more composable ERP and integration platforms. So great point. Thank you for sharing that. Asrar on LinkedIn says hi. So thank you for being here today, Asrar. Here's a comment from Mahad Dewan on Maha from Egypt on YouTube. Says Odoo is gaining a good marketplace in Egypt. We will, spoiler alert, Odoo, among many other vendors, will be receiving awards here today as well. So be sure to stick around for that. This is a comment from YouTube. It says none of the top 10 is really open source. Issues in 2026 are still centered around license costs. AI for the small and mid market is still a challenge to justify the ROI, and that's a great point. And ROI is a word that we've forgotten in this industry in many cases. What's the business value? What's the ROI? Is it worth the investment we're going to make? So great points there. All right. Well, let's get on to the next category, Greg. What's next on our list here?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say that I lost my first card. I've got the cards for the rest of the awards, but the card that we're pretending that I'm holding up is best ERP for Microsoft-centric organizations.
Okay.
And surprisingly, the runner-up is NetSuite. Basically a strong SaaS ERP, but it lacks some of the native productivity layer integration, especially with the Microsoft suite. The winner of the category, again, not surprisingly, is Microsoft Dynamics 365. I mean, when you look at the seamless integration across Azure, Power Platform, Teams, Office, it makes a natural choice for Microsoft-heavy environments, right? You really can't get past the interconnectivity of all of those systems, the useful just log in or plug in, plug out, easy access to all of your applications in one spot. The 365 Finance and Operations stands out because it is a modern ERP platform embedded within one of the most complete enterprise ecosystems available today. So as a part of the broader Microsoft Cloud, the hyperscaler infrastructure with Azure is just an amazing platform. And also you can't approximate on-premise like we used to. The hyperscaler attention to security, to all of the different things that go into billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. And that's going to become even more important as we get into AI actually composing those applications that are running on that platform. So what do you think about those choices for Microsoft centric?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I'd also add that NetSuite, I'm not sure why it is or if others agree with me on this, but NetSuite, in some ways, it has a similar look and feel as Microsoft. I feel like people that know Microsoft tools really well, NetSuite is an intuitive transition or an intuitive extension of that knowledge. But one thing that, as you were saying all this, I was thinking about, 10 or 20 years ago, I remember getting client feedback and even peer feedback in the industry about how Microsoft's enterprise tech strategy was kind of disjointed. It was kind of a mess because they had, at the time they had several different ERP systems between Navision, Exapta, Great Plains, et cetera. And then, then they still had the Power Apps. They had Azure more recently, but they just had all this different stuff happening, all these different things they're investing in that it seemed kind of messy at the time. But now you look at it and think maybe it's really smart. Maybe they just were ahead of their time and now we're all catching up. And now I think Microsoft does have an advantage because, one size does not fit all, and Microsoft fits that philosophy really well because they've got all these different systems. And to your point, people are used to using Microsoft productivity tools in the workplace anyway. So when you throw D365 or Power Apps or whatever, Power BI on top of that, it's an easier transition for them in many cases.
Correct. And we all know that Excel is the largest ERP system in the world, right?
Yes, it is. It's underrated. It's been the number one ERP system for about 40 years now, I imagine.
40 years? Sure.
Yeah. It's just all the other systems are all just noise, right? We're just trying to figure out a way to replace those Excel spreadsheets. But it is true. I mean, I think we're always going to have spreadsheets, and the fact that Microsoft is able to so seamlessly tie together some of those different applications, I think is super powerful.
Definitely.
Good. Well, here's the next category: best ERP for upper, small, and mid-market and lower mid-market organizations. Upper, small, and mid-sized companies, lower mid-market. So basically not small companies, but more, call it the larger small companies, the smaller mid-sized companies, right in that mid-market. What are the leading systems there? So let's start with the runner-up. Runner-up, you've probably heard of the winner. You may not have heard of the runner-up. So the runner-up, I'll tell you first why they're the runner-up. They have a good balance of flexibility, modern architecture, and predictable pricing for growing organizations. And they do focus on and tailor organizations in this space. And that runner-up is Acumatica. So if you're not familiar with them, it's spelled Acumatica, one C in the spelling there. So that's a runner-up. Acumatica, the runner-up for best ERP for upper, small, and mid-sized companies. And then the winner for this category is particularly strong in manufacturing and distribution, and I'd say also retail centric mid-market firms. And that winner for this category is Epicor. So best ERP for upper SMB, lower mid-market organizations is Epicor, company that's been around for a long time. Great product suite that we've seen used successfully. A lot of our clients are implementing it now or have implemented it recently. What are your thoughts on that category, Greg?
I think that especially Epicor is really an outstanding choice as a winner. They have done a lot in the last, call it 6 years, with their executive team really going out and acquiring the right software systems and edge solutions to make it a more complete solution, especially in the manufacturing space, right? Field services they recently added 2 years ago. I think it became GA, but they do some incredible things with CPG, with or CPQ, excuse me, and the field service piece of it, which a lot of the clients that we work with and talk to are looking for those specific niche pieces. And that's why a lot of the clients that we've worked with over the last 4 or 5 years have chosen Epicor and gone in that direction.
Right.
The implementations are going well too, for the most part, with Epicor.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. For a while they had, I'd say this is probably 10 or 15 years ago. They went through, Epicor went through a couple private equity ownership changes. And for a while there, they had a strategy where they were very product centric to the point where they were underinvesting or in some cases retrenching from building out their ecosystem of implementation partners. And, I know a lot of their implementation partners for a while there were feeling neglected and not supported by Epicor. And it was, they're building they had always had a pretty good product, but they didn't always have the ecosystem to support it. But more recently in the last, I'd say 5 or 10 years, they've really invested heavily in that ecosystem of implementation partners, which is arguably just as maybe even more important than the product itself. So I think they've come a long way just in the last 5 years, and a lot of that is due to leadership changes. I think they're finally have a relatively stable leadership team that's seems to be taking them in the right direction.
Yeah, and Acumatica. I mean, it's if you haven't heard of Acumatica, you will. So, I mean, I see ads in the airport all of the time now for Acumatica, but they're really making great strides. So,
yeah, we didn't have a category for highest growth or most up and coming. We have some similar categories, but Acumatica would probably be on that list, in the top tier of that list if we did have it.
Definitely.
So that was number 7 on our top 10 list of top interview segments of the last 12 months. That was with Greg Benton from Third Stage Consulting. And that full interview, that full episode can be found in episode number 255 of Transformation Ground Control. Just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So number 6 on our list is why change management gets overlooked and when you should start change management. This interview segment featured Sarah and Julia from the Third Stage Consulting team. They're based out of Europe, out of our European office, and they were on talking about change impact assessments, vendor methodologies, and there's just a lot of practical myth busting here. Both Sarah and Julia talk about how change management is too often dismissed as the fluffy nice to have of communications and training, when the actual core is the change impact assessment. The bottom line is you can't guide people through a journey you haven't mapped, and that relying on a vendor methodology like SAP's Activate or Microsoft's SureStep or any of the other methodologies out there focused on those software vendor methodologies alone will not deliver the people side ROI, which is where the real ROI is. So this is meant to be a useful counterweight to the technology-centric advice that's out there in the marketplace. So let's dive into this clip with Sarah and Julia talking about why change management gets overlooked, when to start, and how change impact assessments can better inform your change strategy. Why do so many organizations and project teams overlook the importance of change management? If it's as important as we're all saying it is, the audience seems to be in agreement that yes, change management is important, then why do organizations and project teams overlook that so much? Why don't we start with you, Sarah?
Sure, I kind of think it's twofold, actually. So maybe this is a slightly kind of used to happen more than it did in the past, because I know sort of change management, I think, is being more embraced as time goes on and people do start to see the value of it. But in my personal experience, I've had a lot of people kind of view it as being this kind of fluffy, nice to have thing. We come in and we do a bit of communications, we might do a bit of training, we're a bit of cheerleading for the project or whatever it might be. But I think this is kind of a fundamental misconception of the value that change management can bring, and it can really hinder, your ERP program or your digital transformation. And I kind of think the main problem or the main issue around this is that people don't fully understand what change management is and what value it can bring. So in my mind, I think you could you should view it as being just as crucial to a project as project management, for example. So you wouldn't start one of these projects without a project manager. You shouldn't start one without a change manager either. So I think that's kind of the first thing. I think the second thing is that people have often had quite a bad experience on change programs, possibly because there hasn't been a change manager or they've been kind of thrown in at the end and it hasn't worked out for whatever reason. So there might be this kind of negative buildup of, I've been through change before and it was terrible and change management is rubbish because it doesn't work. But it's 9 times out of 10, it's because it hasn't been done properly or it hasn't been given the opportunity to kind of deliver that value. So I think those are kind of 2 things, quite different things going on, but in my experience, they're sort of semi-common, which is slightly worrying.
Yeah.
I think it's also about the change maturity of the organisation as a whole. I don't think I've worked with many organisations where they've been particularly mature at business change. So change management tends to happen sporadically because they have a project manager or a program director who knows about it, and then we organically come in like moles and say hi, and then we deliver good change, and then that helps spread the message. And I think that's quite common. I think that even if you have a change management organization or a change management office or some sort of center of excellence as well, I do think people still, they need to do a really good PR job more than anybody else in terms of the benefits that change management brings. Um, because otherwise people will still cling on to this idea that we're just about comms and training, and then therefore that is seen as an added cost and an overhead that could potentially be done by the project manager or a BA, insert other existing person on the project. And that's part of the problem as well, is that change management needs really strong PR.
Yeah, that's it. You bring up a really good point, Julia, and that is, you mentioned that oftentimes people will view change management as training and comms, and I think that's probably the two most obvious first things that we think of when we think of change management. We think about, we've got to train people how to use the system, and we've got to do some communication to make sure people understand what's going on with the project and what the changes are at a high level. How would you summarize, maybe I'll start with you, Julia, since you triggered this question in my head. How would you summarize just some of the other things, without going into detailed methodologies necessarily, but what are some of the major components of change management outside of train the trainer and basic communications?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so first of all, we start off with stakeholders, stakeholder analysis, stakeholder identification, and from there, create a stakeholder strategy to make sure that you have categorized your stakeholders and you're bringing them along with you on that journey as well, to make sure that you've got some way of making sure that you've given the right people the right messages at the right time, outside of mass communications. Okay, that's not necessarily done by the change manager, but you're encouraging the sponsor and whoever is best placed to take that message forward. So making sure that you're, let's say, building a coalition of change that way. So that's one thing. I think secondly, we've touched on it, is the bit that's absolutely core to me is this change impact assessment. You will never be able to deliver, well, you might be by luck, but certainly not by design, successful change if you don't understand the core of what is actually changing. So there's a massive piece of work that needs to be done about understanding the processes, understanding the process taxonomy, looking at what they're going from where they're going to, understanding that gap, understanding how big that change is for each of those areas or each of those teams, individuals, departments, however you want to break it down, and then looking to see how you're going to build that gap for change. Now, that could be communications, it could be training, it could be a number of other things, but for me, change impact is the absolute core of what we do, and that has got nothing to do with comms and nothing to do, that's the output of that comms and training. The change impact is the absolute core of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great overview. What would you add anything to that, Sarah, as far as major work streams within change management?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in addition to those kind of key bits, because obviously I do reiterate what Julia is saying, the impact assessment is absolutely crucial, and kind of everything else does spit out from that. But you've got items such as, business readiness assessments to make sure that the business is kind of ready and able and capable to take on the change. Another kind of key bit, which is kind of linked to communications and engagement, is your change network change agency network. So essentially, we kind of leading into this sort of building coalition of change, creating a network of internal advocates for all your change that can then kind of help drive and deliver. And they do help with kind of the training and the comms, but it's kind of it's the piece that comes before delivering those kind of key bits of work. And then I kind of on top of that, and towards the end of the project, actually, we get involved heavily in kind of support models, hypercare, lessons learned, all this kind of really good stuff as well that kind of helps with adoption and embedment. So it's kind of an all-encompassing role, actually, which is probably why we're tired quite a lot of the time, because we end up doing a lot of stuff. But in my experience, if you're on kind of a large ERP program, you will have a change manager, but you also have a training manager and a comms manager. So that kind of tells you that there's key roles for those two sections in addition to the change manager. So it really isn't just all about that. It's all this other really good stuff that kind of paints the picture as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, Sarah, you were talking about how resistance to change can spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I'm sure you have both seen this in your careers, a lot of times as change practitioners, you get pulled into a firefighting situation where the change management is just out of control, tons of resistance. The rest of the project might be going fine. The technical piece of it might be going fine. We've built a system that works, but now we've got some change issues and it's a mess. So I guess the question becomes, when should change management start so that we can avoid the wildfires and proactively get ahead of that resistance and turn it into a business value proposition instead of a firefighting proposition? What do you think, Sarah? When should change management begin?
I mean, as early as possible is always the answer to that question. So I kind of think as soon as you've got your project manager and your project team is being built, that's when the change manager needs to come in. Quite a lot of, or in my experience, I think quite a lot of organizations tend to get this wrong. And I'm not sure if it's because of kind of competing priorities or, it's an extra financial burden to bring somebody in sooner. But it's really crucial because, kind of as we've alluded to, at the front end of the project, we do so much information kind of gathering and data collection on how the organization is functioning. If we're brought in later, we're kind of playing catch up, and it's almost too late to kind of spend a good couple of months or whatever it is kind of understanding the organization when you're trying to understand the future, if that makes sense. So I think, as soon as you've got your discovery phase going on and maybe the system implementator is coming on board to talk people through the new system and the benefits, that's where we should be starting, and be party to all of those technical meetings as well, just so that we've got kind of the ammunition and the material that we need to build those comms and engagement plans with the information that you get at that really early stage.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Julia? Anything to add to that?
No, other than to echo Sarah's comments, it's absolutely about setting the scene and understanding up front. To link that back to resistance as well, there's two ways that I like to manage resistance. Is first of all, anticipated resistance. What do you expect people to be doing so that you can build a strategy to deal with that? As you progress through the change, you will find that resistance pops out of anywhere, and there's you obviously have to manage that as you go along. But apart from anything else, being in at the beginning can help you understand the landscape. It can help you understand who the teams are. Talking to stakeholders can help you understand their thoughts and things. And as well, if you bring change in at the beginning, that helps ensure that your leadership is aligned. Okay, so what you don't want to do, or certainly what I don't want to do, is to go through the change and find out that your key stakeholders, your sponsor network, or whatever you want to call them, has a different idea of what's happening. Bringing change management in at the beginning can help safeguard against that, so that your stakeholders are all in agreement about what's going to happen, that resistance from them is negated, and therefore they become ambassadors for change, and they can help manage resistance within their own teams and functions and areas.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's a good approach. Now, speaking of approaches and just sort of the way we tackle change management, SAP has their Activate methodology that many, if not most, organizations deploying S/4HANA will use. Does that Activate methodology give us what we need to deploy change management successfully?
I'll take this one. I'm going to say no. Looking at the methodology itself, change management appears to be in the layer that says project management, and I don't think that there's enough detail to that as well, and I think that's very much limited to things like mass communications and train the trainer. Hopefully in the past 35 minutes that we've identified that change is much more deeper and wider than those things as well. So I feel like if you were going to look at you're going to rely on the Activate methodology on its own, I really wouldn't be confident that you're going to get the level of return of investment from your people that you think that you're going to get from spending millions of pounds or dollars or whatever currency on a new ERP. However, I think that if you were to use a change manager with the Activate methodology and to complement that, that could work. But I would say on its own, it doesn't make me happy that it's included everything that I would do as a change manager for any project, let alone a large scale ERP digital transformation.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're going to just use that as a methodology in its own without the change management aspect, the people element just won't fly unless you have a miracle. Right. I think. However, I do think the Activate methodology has some good bits to it in terms of the change management side of things. So, the stages that it goes through, so the discover, prepare, explore, etc. I think those are really good phases to be able to hang your change management plan off. I think there was a question actually, and I've lost it now, but it was kind of, how do project managers, I think, work with, would you set up 2 separate work streams, or would you manage together versus separately? So I think that's quite interesting here, because you've kind of got your project management work stream and your tech work stream that will use the Activate methodology, and your change management work stream will run in parallel to that. So for the discovery phase, for example, when users are getting familiar with the benefits of SAP, that's when we would come in and do some analysis in terms of, benefits realization, prep, and all that kind of good stuff. So I think, very long-winded answer to your question, I think it's kind of doing it in tandem, and you can't really have one without the other. I think they need to be done together to get a successful result. Absolutely.
Yeah. I feel like that if you look at the Activate methodology on a page, there's a lot of weighting attached to other things like data integration and all of those things, and project management and change management is down the bottom. And I feel like they're all equally important as each other. You can have the best, data integration transformation if you want to, and the best data quality, but without project management and that discipline and change management discipline, do you know what I mean? I feel like it's suggesting that something is more important than another, and actually, I would disagree with that.
Yeah, it almost, when I look at the Activate methodology, and it's not just Activate, by the way, it's the methodologies of other ERP vendors as well. But when you look at some of these methodologies like Activate, I feel like it's the technologist view of how a software should be deployed, and then they realize, wait, we do need to add some change management here, so let's pepper in a couple, training. Let's do some train the trainer. Let's do some basic communications, just so we can say we covered it. But I think what we're saying here is there's a lot more to it than kind of your basic technology driven change management focus.
Yeah.
That was the number 6 segment on our top 10 list of interviews from the last 12 months. That was Sarah and Julia talking about change management. And you can find that full episode and that full discussion at episode 227 of Transformation Ground Control. So coming in at number 5 on our top 10 list is actually from that same segment, that same episode, number 227. This one rated a bit higher. This whole episode is very popular, by the way. It's one of our more popular episodes of the last 12 months, which is why 2 clips from it came in the top 10 list here. And in this next segment, Sarah and Julia talk about how the most human relatable interviews, in my opinion, that talks about the vivid original concept of how the threat of obvious saboteurs is not the biggest threat. It's the active quitters, the people in the organization that are on board with change until it disrupts the world. And then that resistance becomes contagious, spreads like wildfire, and becomes a fire that's very hard to put out once it starts. And so this was a really helpful discussion, different from the last segment that we talked about at number 6 on our list, which was more about change impact assessments. This one's more about conceptually and organizationally, psychologically, why and how people start to resist change and how you can overcome that, and really dig into and identify that resistance to change, or that passiveness that can lead to failure. And so this is number 5 on our list of top 10 interviews of the last 12 months. How do you see change management being different for S/4HANA implementations compared to other sorts of technology or business change initiatives that you've been involved with?
Julie,
Let's start with Julia on that one. Sorry, I'm supposed to prompt you. You're supposed to answer the question.
Okay. I mean, I think initially what I would say is that every change implementation is different, because there's a number of different variables in there, including what people have used before, what the organizational what's the word I'm looking for, appetite is for change, what the kind of, what the culture is in the organization. So there's lots of different variables that will impact change and that change journey. And the ERP, or what the solution is one of those variables. So notwithstanding those, using SAP for HANA, I think it's a big system. okay, it's a big system with lots of bits. I think it's quite complex for people to get their heads around, especially if you've come from lots of legacy systems. Again, one of the questions is where's that gap of where you've come from to where you're going to? If you've come from, I don't know, a bunch of spreadsheets and legacy systems, that jump to SAP for HANA is potentially massive for people. That's a big it's a big jump for people to actually make in terms of their heads and their abilities and capabilities. And even if you've come from a previous iteration of SAP, it's still quite a big jump in terms of the way that it's used differently. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that every change is different, and there's lots of variables involved in delivery of that change.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, really. I mean, I think the key for me is that kind of it doesn't really matter almost what system you're using. You're still going to have to go through that same change management framework process. So you're still going to need to do, change management strategy and plan, your readiness assessments, all the comms and the training, all this really good stuff that's really important for people to make that journey. But I think it's really important to make sure that your impact assessment, so, Julia kind of mentioned it, but looking at how the organization is today and how it's going to look in the future, doing that assessment in enough depth and enough coverage is really important, because if you don't know how it's changing, you can't kind of guide people through that journey. And I think it's the same for, SAP or S4HANA, but any kind of ERP system, you're going to have to do that assessment to make sure it's effective, and ultimately make sure that people know what's going on, when we switch it on.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes total sense. And then I also want to turn to the audience too. I had asked a couple questions of them. I asked where they're joining from first and foremost. We have people from all over the world, as I mentioned before. We have Natalia from London, UK, Sandra from Regina, SK. It's Aditya from Calgary, Canada. Someone joining from Divya, USA, Boston, Massachusetts, New Brunswick, Canada, Curacao, Williamstead, Curacao, very pretty part of the world. So thank you all for joining here today, people from all over the world. So thank you for that. A couple comments too. This is from Tofik on LinkedIn. Tofik, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly or close to correctly. He says change management is the key to success. So at least we have one person on board so far, at least one person that's agreeing that change management is really important. So thank you for that. And then also from LinkedIn, this is from Alcinda. Alcinda says change management is one of the key levers you pull to execute a digital strategy. Otherwise, you would have just spent that investment on a shiny object that isn't used. I think that's very consistent with what you both just alluded to as well. S4HANA is a great technology, a lot of groundbreaking stuff and capability in the software, but that doesn't really matter if people aren't using it and it's not helping make the business and the operations better. So thank you for that feedback. One other comment here, a follow-up here from Tafik. He says, change management is the key to success. At the end, it's people within the organization that utilize the ERP system. If the change impact is not managed within the organization and the people, the implementation process could be jeopardized. So change impact being one of the key words here. I guess just sort of maybe a follow-up question or a building on Tofik's point there. How big are these impacts typically that you see, with whether it's S4HANA implementations or any sort of massive ERP implementation? How big are the impacts? Are they as big as we think? Are they bigger? Like, how would you explain or summarize how big those changes are? Let's start with you, Sarah.
I mean, it really, really does depend on the organization and the people. There's so many variations to this. You can kind of open the Pandora's box, as it were, and look inside, and you've got all these really great people who are very sort of tech savvy, and perhaps the change isn't quite as big for those types of people. But I think Julia mentioned it earlier. You've got kind of colleagues that may have been using Excel for the last 20 years, instead of an ERP, and somebody who is in that scenario, that's going to be a much bigger impact to that sort of person than it might be for somebody else. So I think it really does vary. I think also there's kind of maybe a bit of a sort of a misconception that if people are already using SAP, going from SAP to S4HANA would be easy, right? But I think that's quite a risky assumption to make, just because it is quite a different tool, and it's less customizable, all these kind of things. So I think, again, you might go, oh yeah, they're already using SAP, isn't that brilliant? We'll switch it on and they'll be fine. But it's, even that can actually be a really, really big impact to quite a lot of people in the company. So just really important to make sure that impact assessment is done in that detail. to uncover those things.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Julia?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the question raised by Natalia in terms of how do we structure that for an ERP. I tend to do it by process and look at, first of all, but the way that I would structure it is I would look at each department or each function that has been impacted, then have a look at those processes and work with a business analyst to look at to see what the processes are, build a process taxonomy, and then what I would probably do is do a heat map of how many processes are being impacted for every team, and that will help you understand where the red areas are, areas where you want to focus more change effort than other areas, and that's a really good starting point. And then from there, there's obviously lots of different things that you can drill it down into, things like role mapping, other types of things as well. But for me, processes are at the core of that. So
yeah, and leading with the process and looking at how the software is going to work with those processes, and then ultimately figuring out how's that different than the way you're doing things today.
And I think so. The other thing that I wanted to say is the UI or the user interface. That's a really important thing to think about as well, because it's all very well moving to an ERP, but if you're moving to an ERP which is, let's say, fiddly to use, or its interface isn't as user friendly as you would expect, that's a challenge to change as well, is to get people to start thinking in that particular language or using that kind of skill set or expecting to see that. And if we're using the ProSci model, that's where this knowledge and ability comes into place before we go live, is to let people understand and see and play with it before we hit the ground running. And then at least then they've got a chance of, when we go live, they're more successful using it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, you had an interesting point too that I want to come back to, that I don't want to gloss over, which is the fact that if you're an existing SAP customer, let's say you're using R3 or even ECC, and there's this perception oftentimes that it's a lift and shift, it's still SAP. Yeah, it might be a little bit different, but it's for the most part going to be the same system. And to your point, it's really not. I mean, I think it's worth highlighting that point you made, which is it's a total rewrite of the technology. So it's an entirely new system. Yes, it kind of has a similar SAP look and feel that, SAP customers might find somewhat familiar, but the capabilities, the processes, the way it works, especially as you mentioned, the private cloud, and even more so the public cloud version of S/4HANA is going to be less flexible, and it's going to be probably a bigger change than you think for a lot of organizations, especially if you have a lot of customizations in your legacy SAP environment. You're not going to have that in the new environment, presumably.
I think that's actually a really big issue, because that kind of creates, I find, a lot of change resistance. So people who are used to the customization element and quite enjoy that aspect of it, to have that taken away, it's a very hard thing to then sell to people. They go, oh, where's my, whatever it is, I'm used to doing it this way. And all of a sudden, the change manager's coming in and saying, oh, yeah, we're taking all that lovely customization away from you. How do you feel about that? So it's quite difficult. And if that's not managed properly and given kind of the time and the engagement that is needed with the end users, it can become a really negative thing, and people go, I don't want this, and they kind of actively start to resist it, which is where you really, really don't want to be.
Yeah, that's a good point, and maybe I'll ask you this, Julia. This is off script. I'll warn you ahead of time. I didn't prep you for this question, but when you think about some of the emerging technologies that SAP and other vendors have, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and some of the analytics and things, some of the automation technologies that maybe are a bit more, call it, aggressive in the ability to automate a human's job. Do you guys see that being is that a bigger threat? Is that creating more change resistance? In other words, do the more advanced technologies that can actually do more and deliver more business value, does that create more of a threat to people, and from a change management perspective? What do you think, Julia?
Funny enough, I'm starting off a digital transformation with the organization that I'm working with at the moment. And part of that is about encompassing AI into that. And while I feel like, so the organization has done some research of that into the past. It's a university, so they've done some research into how students feel about AI. And the research that came out was that they feel that it's part threat and part opportunity as well. But I think the fear with people is that they don't understand how to use it properly. what would be for a student, for example, what to be or what is just using AI to do what it's meant to do. So I think I think there's a real mix of feeling that it's a threat and it can take over your job, but there's also a real feeling that with proper education about AI and chat GPT and all of the other things, is that there is a feeling that it is potentially a good opportunity for us for an organization to take a step change digitally, to move forward into that world. But again, it's about that messaging and management of that message, and not letting people just run with their own perceptions of what AI is.
Right. Yeah. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I agree. And I think you've hit it on the head there, Julia, when it's about, saying it's about messaging, because at the end of the day, if all this great new stuff's coming into the business and we haven't properly told the person what that means for them, people tend to go for kind of, if you've got options on the table, they tend to go for the negative one and go, oh, that means I'm going to lose my job, even if it's not the case. And if you haven't kind of taken people through that engagement journey, people get really worried, and then performance drops, all these kind of horrible things that you really want to avoid. So I think the key is to kind of explain it to people in the way that they understand, but be really open and honest about people and give them time to digest what's happening. And if you can do that, people are much more willing to kind of engage with it and start to embrace the change, rather than going, oh no, this is automatically bad for me. I'm going to do this active quitting kind of sort of step away kind of thing. Because again, that's the worst scenario, which we really want to try and avoid.
Yeah, active quitting. That's a good thread to pull into this too. It seems like that's the thing that a lot of organizations overlook, is they look for the obvious sabotage resistors, the people that are just blatantly opposed to the project. And those people are hard to find because there's usually not that many of them. And usually that's not the biggest threat. It seems like the biggest threat are the active quitters, the people that they're on board with change in general, but now that you're rocking my world or disrupting my world, now I'm going to resist it because I'm not as excited about it now that you're telling me I'm going to change my job.
It's quite contagious as well, isn't it? Sorry, Julia, I was just going to say there's this kind of rolling effect. You sort of see one person who starts to maybe panic a little bit, and then it spreads and it's like wildfire, and it's once that's happened, it's a really hard fire to put out, I find, whereas you could have probably prevented it in the first place by doing your change management effectively.
Yeah. And I think there, just to touch on a question that I can see that someone's asked, is about expectations management. And yes, you're absolutely right, is that it's about setting that clear vision at the end, what the organization is going to look like and what it's going to look like for an individual stroke team stroke department. Is really important so that they can buy into it. Absolutely, it's the fear of the unknown. If you just say we're changing and we've got a digital transformation, I'm a change manager, I would panic at that, because I think I don't know what that means. What does it mean? Am I going to be asked to do something that I don't know how to do? Do I have to learn a new system? Is it going to be harder? Is it going to take away? Am I going to lose my job? Sell a vision, be clear about the vision and the disbenefits that might bring, because clearly, there may be disbenefits, there may be an organizational restructure, but along with that comes benefits, and at least you've been honest and transparent, and that really helps people at the outset of the journey get it in their head and helps them move forward that little bit, because what we don't want people to do is to stay where they are or to move back. We want people to be moving forward in that change journey, even incrementally, even just a little step forward at any time.
Yeah. That was number 5 on our top 10 list of interviews over the last 12 months. That again was with Sarah Stanley Smith and Julia Boyce. That was episode 227. You can find that at transformationgroundcontrol.com. So we've got 4 left to go. The top 4. I'm curious to hear what you think the topics will be in this top 4 list. What topics have you not heard yet? Drop your comments below, and hopefully you'll hear your favorite topic coming up. And by the way, if you don't, by chance, you can always go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, search through past episodes. You'll probably find whatever topic you're looking for somewhere in those nearly 300 episodes that we've produced so far over the last 5.5 years. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or a free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 277. My name is Eric Kimberling, and we're counting down the top 10 interview segments and topics of this podcast over the last 12 months. We're up to number 4 on our list, and number 4 is a discussion that I had with co-host Darian Fiakuski. And here we talk about the counter hype behind and a warning sign about AI cost uncertainty and SAP's strategy pivot. So here in this discussion, you'll see my warning is that the only certain thing about AI pricing is that today is probably the lowest it'll ever be. Although I will say the caveat here is that I just saw that I believe it was Anthropic recently slashed their cost to consumers and to enterprises because it's getting so competitive now with ChatGPT and some of the other Google Gemini and some of the other providers in the marketplace. But I think longer term, you're not going to see this low of pricing again. I think those prices are going to go up, and that's what I argue here in this episode from just a few weeks ago. And vendors are taking losses to get customers locked in, which is sort of the software model. You do the freemium type thing, you get people hooked, you get them to pay, and then it becomes higher switching costs. And then over time, you add usage-based models, and then suddenly customers have lost the cost control that they had with the per-seat licensing, and they've got a lot less predictability. So this discussion here and this topic, this thread, is also anchored to the Gartner prediction that over 40% of agentic AI projects will be canceled by the end of 2027. So it's a part news, part opinion, part trend discussion here. This is from episode 268, where I talk about with Darian about AI cost uncertainty and SAP's strategy pivot.
We're going to talk about SAP and how they're pivoting their commercial strategy away from the cloud ERP migration push that has defended them. And I know we've talked about a lot for the past few years now. So what this article was saying is the numbers tell the story. So SAP's 2025 on-premise support revenue target was $8.5 billion, but actual results came in at $10.5 billion, a $2 billion shortfall against their own migration projections. From 2021 to 2024, on-premise support revenue declined just 2%, far slower than what SAP originally predicted. Their CEO is now establishing a new customer value group led by Thomas Sarastring. Sorry, Thomas, if I pronounced your last name wrong. With hundreds of people focused on driving AI adoption and usage-based pricing models instead of the traditional migration deals. So why this matters, this is a tactic admission that SAP's move to the cloud or get left behind narrative hasn't played out the way the company or the industry maybe besides you, Eric, expected. Customers aren't migrating at the pace SAP projected, and Gartner estimates that over 10,000 SAP customers will still be running legacy ECC systems beyond 2030, even though mainstream support ends in 2027. Rather than doubling down on migration pressure, SAP is now pivoting to monetize its existing customer base through AI licensing, business data, cloud, and broader portfolio upselling. ERP consultant Aslar Batch of Dragon ERP described the new strategy bluntly, saying getting ECC customers into the cloud can start upselling AI licensing, business data cloud, upsell. The shift also signals that rip and replace modernization approaches have proven ineffective at scale, and the industry is moving towards brownfield migrations and incremental modernization instead. So, Eric, I don't know if this comes as a major surprise to you, but I wanted to get your take on it, and then I have a couple of questions to follow up on about this.
It actually does surprise me. I didn't realize a lot of what you just said. Most of that is new to me. I didn't know. First of all, the Gartner's predicting, he said 30% of customers will still be on premise after 2030. I think is what he said.
This 10,000 customers.
Or 10,000, I'm sorry. Oh, the 30 was 2030, 10,000 customers. That's still a lot. So that's a lot of customers that I don't know what percentage that is, but that's a pretty big number. And I think it's interesting that, and I think it's actually really smart if this is all true and SAP sticks with the strategy. I think it's what they should have been doing all along. Because what's happening now is I think they're creating too big of a chasm between the ECC customers and where they are today versus where SAP wants them to be with S4HANA. And it's not to say you can't guide them towards S4HANA public cloud long term. I think that's still the right approach for SAP. And if I were SAP or an investor in SAP, which I'm not, I would strongly advocate for that. So I don't blame them for wanting to get customers in the cloud, but the way in which they've done it has been, I think, it's a self-inflicted wound strategically and in terms of their own goodwill and perception in the marketplace. But I think the other problem they've been having is they're losing a lot of that maintenance that they're still making off ECC customers. They're starting to lose some of that as some customers move to third-party maintenance and or some customers decide, I'm just going to go a totally different direction from SAP because I don't want to do SAP Rise or I don't want to go to public cloud or whatever. So they end up, in some cases, going to Oracle or Microsoft or best of breed composable system. So I think it's actually smart of them because I think they're going to turn away a lot less people now, and they're probably going to keep their legacy customers more entrenched in the SAP ecosystem. It's just that now SAP is meeting them where they are, and now you can start to bring them back to where you always wanted them to go, which is to S4HANA public cloud. So I think it's actually very smart. I commend them for doing that. I hope they stick with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I found interesting about this article is them saying they're creating the new customer value group with hundreds of people focused on AI adoption. When a vendor creates a team specifically to drive adoption for their AI products, should customers see that as true support or as a sales motion dressed up as customer success? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly not a bad thing. It's something that SAP has always done to their credit. I mean, they always have had like a value engineering group. For a long time, they had this group that was like a consulting group almost that would go in and help you figure out how to use their technology to get more value out of your organization. So I think it's it's just another extension of something they've always done. Other vendors do it too, but SAP has actually been pretty good. As much as I do knock SAP at times, there are some things they do really well. And I think that whole value engineering and now the AI adoption group, I think that's something that's very smart because if you think about it, SAP, for better or for worse, is a very complex product. It can do a lot of different things and people get lost in it. It's easy to get lost in the solution because there's so much there and it's so hard for an organization to consume it all. And most of the time we find that companies are using S4HANA or SAP legacy systems fine. They weren't necessarily implemented poorly, but it's a lot of shelfware. It's stuff that's just sitting there. People don't know about certain functionality. They never deployed certain modules. So I think this is just a good way to make sure that post-implementation or post-purchase, customers are actually getting the value they expect. And I imagine this same group will help them sell more AI solutions as well if I'm just basing it on what SAP has done in the past with their value engineering group.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And one last question I have about this is if SAP is shifting to usage-based pricing model for AI capabilities, how should enterprise buyer model the total cost of ownership, could usage-based AI pricing end up being more expensive than traditional licensing for high volume operations?
Yeah, I think this is the big hidden below the iceberg issue with AI in general, not just with SAP, but with any ERP or enterprise tech vendor, is the pricing long term to me is very uncertain. And it's the only certain thing about pricing is that today is the lowest it's going to be. AI, the cost of AI is just going to go up. Right now, it's sort of like when Amazon was first building out their massive infrastructure. They were willing to take massive losses for years just to build the infrastructure to get customers hooked on Amazon Prime and fast deliveries and stuff like that. So they lost money for years and years and years before they ever turned a profit. Now, in the case of Amazon, they have such massive scale and it's consumer facing. So they weren't, they didn't necessarily raise prices as a result. But I think the ERP vendors are doing something similar in that they're getting people locked in. They're deploying all these AI agents to where the switching costs will be high. And they will need to recoup the cost of their large, huge data center and AI investments somehow. And it just sucks up a lot of data, a lot of computing power to do all the stuff we're doing with AI right now. So I think that's something that CIOs, CFOs, and executives should be aware of, is that you have to understand there's a lot of cost uncertainty around what the cost of AI is going to be, especially if you start moving to usage-based. Because one thing, at least user-based, in the past, you could control that. I can decide that if I add 100 people, I'm going to add 100 licensees or 100 subscriptions to software. With AI, though, you don't necessarily have control or insights or visibility into how much consumption or how much you're actually consuming. And a lot of times you don't have control over it because your people have the tools and they can do whatever they want with it. And so now you're going to create a situation where, it's easy to see that spiraling out of control if you don't have the right governance in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super interesting with SAP, but I want to get into another topic about agentic AI and how Gartner predicts that over 40% of those projects will be canceled by the end of 2027, which I feel like is very soon. So this headline caught my attention. It says that primarily due to escalating costs, unclear business value, and inadequate risk controls, that's what they predict, that 40% of enterprise agentic AI projects will be canceled by the end of 2027. However, early adopters who invest in proper architecture are achieving average 171% ROI, 192% in the US specifically. But that gap between success and failure comes down to 4 fundamental layers most organizations don't have, which is data architecture, governance, orchestration, and human interface design. So why all this matters, the prediction comes at a stark contrast with the hype cycle around platforms like NVIDIA's Agent Toolkit, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, and Salesforce Agentforce. While vendors are racing to launch agent capabilities, Gartner's research suggests that most organizations lack the foundational infrastructure to make these agents work. The architecture problem is primarily acute. Agents require high-quality, structured, accessible data across enterprise systems, exactly the condition that most companies don't have after years of fragmented digital transformation or other things going on. Hidden cost drivers are also emerging, including high-frequency API calls at scale, custom connectors for legacy systems, and ongoing monitoring and incident repurpose expenses that weren't originally in the business case. Customer service automation shows faster returns than back-office processes, where errors can accumulate before detection. Implementation timelines range from 12 months for the narrow use cases to 2 to 4 years for complex deployments. So overall, the key takeaways that I got from this article were the 40% cancellation rate isn't a combination of agentic AI itself. It's the 171% ROI for well-architectured deployments is compelling, but rather a warning that organizations are treating AI agents as software purchase rather than architectural transformation. And the ones that get the foundation wrong can definitely fail in a very expensive way. Eric, with this, one question I have for you is, if 40% of agentic AI projects will be canceled, what are the warning signs that a project is heading toward failure, and what should a CIO look for at month 3 versus maybe month 12?
Yeah, well, I think when you're looking at month 3 in the shorter term, you need to be real focused, on pilots or identifying areas of innovation where you could be using AI, and it's more. It's focused, but it's also experimental. I mean, you're experimenting, you're trying different use cases of how you might use AI. and you're going to have some failures. You're going to try some that work. Some use cases just don't make sense, or they're not something that could scale, or whatever. It's too disruptive. And so I think just having a clear plan for how you're going to do that and siphon through the low value stuff versus the high value stuff. And then by month 12, obviously you should be focused on doubling down on the things that have been working and the things you're trying to scale out across the organization. I'm kind of surprised that, 40% will potentially get canceled, in that period of time. And I imagine it's probably not an all or nothing, like either it's canceled or it's not. I mean, there might be some initiatives that get canceled within the same organization that also, decides to move forward with others. But I think it's part of it makes a lot of sense in some ways because it is such a maturing technology. It's such an uncertain technology and it's such a disruptive technology that it makes sense that there's going to be a lot of trial and error that comes along with that.
Absolutely. And I found the interesting part of this one, or at least one of the parts that I found interesting, was the hidden costs, like for high frequency API calls and the custom legacy connectors that keep surprising these organizations that are deploying these agents. Is agentic AI business case fundamentally undercosted right now? Are vendors being transparent about the total cost of ownership, or what do you think is happening here?
I don't think we know what the cost of AI is going to be. I mean, I think that, we were talking about the consumption-based pricing a moment ago. There's just so many different pricing models that software vendors are pursuing, and even like software vendors or ERP software vendors that are moving clients to the cloud. You have two major material costs that are uncertain in the future. One being cloud. As the cloud costs increase, so does AI costs. So you've got AI costs and cloud costs as sort of a double whammy that are going to likely increase the cost of consumption or the cost of computing in general in the future. So I think AI, though, you look at what Oracle and SAP and some of these big, Microsoft, some of these big vendors are spending on their data centers and their infrastructure. It's just massive, massive amounts of money being spent right now. And they have yet to even come close to recouping those costs. So at some point, as this whole cycle matures, the prices have to go up. That's the only way they could possibly go. So I think how much they go up, that's the big wild card, the big question that we're going to have to keep an eye on. But I think it's a tricky situation too, because AI has the power to deliver so much value. But the question is going to be, are companies going to be able to afford it? Are they going to be able to invest or have the appetite to see their AI costs, their cloud costs, their overall consumption costs increasing materially over time? I don't know. We'll have to see.
Absolutely. And my last question I have for this article for you, Eric, is customer service shows faster ROI than maybe back office automation a lot of the times. Should organizations start with customer facing agents and work backward, or does that create a paved path to nowhere if the back office data isn't ready?
Good question. I mean, it's you could start with your customer facing side of things, but you're right. You're paving a path faster to potentially get to bad information or bad processes faster. So your customer service is now, okay, they've got better insights, better visibility into broken data or broken processes. That's not necessarily helpful. So I think it's a matter of looking at an end-to-end process potentially and saying, if I do automate the customer facing side of things, is there something I need to automate or use AI to improve on the inventory availability, the inventory management, the distribution, so that, customers actually get the stuff faster. It's not going to do you any good to tell the customer faster or give them bad news faster that you can't fulfill an order. So I think that's the way to look at it, as an end-to-end process, and making sure that you look at how AI could be used just in that one process. But I think you're onto something there, where you don't want to automate something that just exposes broken stuff underneath the surface. So that discussion is number 4 on our list of top 10 interviews of the last 12 months on this podcast. That was from episode 268. So if you want to see the full episode and hear the full conversation, be sure to check that out. Episode 268 at transformationgroundcontrol.com. So we're up to number 3. Number 3 is a fairly recent discussion as well. This was also from episode 268, which is one of the more popular episodes we've published or produced in the last 12 months. But this one is with a different guest. This is with Kristen Valentine, who is an industry thought leader. She's very experienced in the space. She's been in it for decades, I think even longer than I have. And she's worked with several different software vendors and has a very unique multi-vendor perspective of all the different major players in the marketplace. I don't know anyone in the space that has this much broad experience with different solutions, but also the organizations themselves that produce the solutions. So this is Kristen Valentine, and she was on the show talking about giving her a rare insider perspective, and she's worked with companies such as SAP, Oracle, and Infor, as well as some of the smaller second-tier players like QAD, Syspro, and Epicor. And the core theme of her conversation and her message is that ERP is becoming a commodity, and the market has shifted so that customers are in control, and how the difference between a vendor and a partner is that with a vendor, problems become issues, but a partner, problems become annoyances. And so those are annoyances that need to be fixed. And so there's a lot she talks about here about the difference between partner and vendor. And it's a really good conversation. She's a wealth of knowledge. And this is one of my favorite clips here, which is episode 268 with Kristen Valentine. Do we really need heavy, bulky monoliths, or can we have lightweight ERP and then customer can build the ecosystem around it? Like I know Salesforce has sort of built their ERP offering on this. Many would say Salesforce is not an ERP system. I probably agree with that, although they have built a platform that allows you to deploy ERP-like apps on top of that. So do you think, what do you think here between these platforms or these ecosystems and or best of breed? How do you see that evolving here where we are today and where we're headed?
Well, I think that's an absolutely great observation, because I really do think customers are in the position of choosing and building their own ecosystem around it. And that's key, so that, we're obviously standards-based so that things can, integrate, but with AI, you can make it happen even sooner. And you don't necessarily have to take this entire application and say, okay, I'm gonna make this work. And we've seen people do workarounds, and for political reasons, not necessarily replace, but supplement with best of breed. But you're definitely going to see in the customer, in especially in that kind of 0 to 20 users, where resellers are going to become increasingly important, is they're going to be that partner that brings that stuff together and gives the micro vertical understanding, market intelligence, dynamics, and requirements together relative to what those smaller customers are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it's good points. And then Taiwo on LinkedIn has an interesting point. It comes back to something you were talking about a moment ago when you were talking about supply chains, Kristen. And that comment here, I'll have to read a lot of this because it won't show on the screen, but customers need to do more in process definition mapped to their strategic blueprint, line of business, and compliance framework. Need for vendor solution mapping to their business needs and their growth strategy, AI needs for the business, and more. Once customers understand this, it would be helpful for them to have a better relationships with solution vendors leveraging the cloud and AI. So I think, what Taiwo is referring to here is the fact that vendors are constantly creating these new capabilities that you may not even know about. So when you create a process map, you may not be thinking about, well, how could I use AI to do A, B, and C? You may not really fully understand that capability exists. And so how do you find that right balance between knowing what you want to be when you grow up and using that as a way to find and deploy the right software versus leveraging the software capabilities you may not even really fully understand, but listening to that and following that capability to help you improve your business. So when it comes to process improvement, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the technology that comes first that drives the process improvement, or do you drive the process improvement and then choose the technology?
Well, there's a lot to be said for garbage in, garbage out, right? Obviously I've met you in person, so I'm not going to buy an ERP system and all of a sudden be, taller, richer, thinner. Just not going to happen. I'd like to, certainly, especially when trying to reach high things in my kitchen, but no, those things aren't going to happen.
Taller if I buy their system, that's what I heard. But so you're saying that's just sales messaging?
But what's important to note, though, is that when we talk about, there's a lot to unpack in that. And I think that you're right. First of all, there are so many options. It's going to be kind of mind-boggling to really formulate the right one. But one of the things I think that we're consistently seeing, though, is people underfunding and undervaluing the ability of the employee and the culture to consume new technologies and to adapt. And that's one of the things consistently. And so it's not even just necessarily garbage in, garbage out. It's more about, and I love that observation. So I thank you very much for that, Taiwo, because you do need to consider that. you're literally wasting money if your employees are not ready to consume that software and use it. And also too, with the pressure of PE and PE ownership, it's not like companies can rip and replace anymore. They really do have to make things. They have to make their existing investments work. There was a time, talking about changing of trends. There was a time, literally, the average life of a CIO was 18 months. You could almost guarantee they'd go to a new company, they'd rip everything out, they'd start all over again with something new. And obviously there was a great time for growth for the ERP vendors. I mean, it was just fantastic. Now PEs are like, no, we've got a 3 to 5 year trajectory with you. What have you bought and how do you make the most out of it, which is asset realization. So again, you have to look at, okay, why aren't people using it? Whether are they not comfortable with it? Is it their culture? And in fact, even in many of the roles, when we would be dealing with a new prospect, it was important to even ask which other vendors are they looking at so that you could understand the culture. With a Salesforce-based ERP, if they were in the mix, well, then you knew you've got a pretty young, fast-moving, highly educated prospect, and you're going to have to sell to that to somebody else that wants to do a typical discovery cycle and very methodical, where you might be 6 weeks out before you're doing your first demo. Tells you more about, okay, they're very staid, they're very measured. And so you're going to see different vendors like an IFS or a Deltek in a situation like that. SAP, Oracle, NetSuite, very fast and can adapt quickly to customers. But then obviously people are making more political decisions, right? You're not necessarily going to get fired. You may get cursed at because, your project's overrun, but you're still not going to get fired for buying SAP, Oracle, or NetSuite. So, these are the kinds of things that tells you about where the culture is of the company, and really working on change management and the ability to consume and the desire for people to want to change. Implementations is always underfunded. And I think that's, really one of the main, the challenges. They think they can save money there, which is the one place they should not save money, is on the implementation, because it's that learning and the process and understanding of that application and the asset that just bought. I mean, do you really want to buy a Lamborghini and let it sit in the parking lot? Look at it?
Right. Yeah. Probably not. Yeah. And that shelfware is, a lot of lost money and revenue, and a lot of the economy is wasted on shelfware. And so getting the value out of it is critical. And what about the flip side of it? This is an interesting question from Don on LinkedIn. But looking at the flip side of it, so one risk that you mentioned, Kristen, is not getting the business value, having shelfware, the Lamborghini sitting in the garage that you never drive. But what about on the flip side, as far as where do you see software solutions in general, ERP software solutions in general, having gaps between your ERP system and your business goals? Are there certain areas where you think ERP systems in general are still pretty weak, or they have a tendency to be weak in certain areas that hold companies back, or what are some of those blind spots or potential gaps that buyers should be looking for?
Well, consistent with not only the implementation but the training element that goes with it, is I think that to really understand the system and be super functional in your job is a lot. In fact, for many people, it's just too much. And so I think that is the biggest gap, and that people just don't have the time to really understand what's going on, and nor do they have the corporate structure for people to parse out, okay, you're processing sales orders. Sure, there's some things with, your images and your screens with role defining and keeping that very narrow, but a lot of companies don't have a huge IT organization to be able to do those kinds of things. And so I think the problem is that to really understand the system is just way too much. So they find their one path to do what it is they're doing, and they just do it that way, and then they exit out of the system.
Yeah.
And so they're never really going to use it. And I think, that is the bane of ERP. Again, it's not just your circulatory system, it is your heart. So yeah, you're going to want somebody with an advanced degree to do a heart transplant. Absolutely. But in the same respect, when it gets so overwhelming that people really don't engage with the system unless they have to, and they only do it. If you're a salesperson, you're keeping your Salesforce or your Sugar CRM up to date for fear of threat to your compensation plans. I mean, you really aren't, you're really leaning into the software. And the thing about AI and AI-based applications is they're much more nimble and agile and interactive to you. So you're going to see people use AI point solutions. We were just talking about this earlier, but ERP is 40 years old. And in 40 years, we have about 70 ERP applications. AI is 6 years old-ish, from like Twinkle and I to now. There's over 10,000 AI applications. So you're going to see people who lean into it, picking applications that complement what they want to accomplish. Most notably, and this is another thing too, that can take more disparate data and make that ERP, like, kind of, if you will, Jimmy's on top of there, to really customize it to what they need to do with adding applications, but these really super light footprint applications.
So that was episode number 268 with Kristen Valentine. That was number 3 on our list of the top 10 interviews of the year. Great conversation. Every time she's on the show, I think she's been on 2 or 3 times. Those episodes always do really well. So there's something about her delivery and her knowledge and her personality that you, the viewers, seem to like. So let me know what you think of her interview or any of these interviews in the comments below. So we're up to number 2 on our list of top 10 discussion points. This is another monologue where I am talking about ERP becoming a system of record versus a system of innovation, and sort of working through the debate between those two philosophies of, is ERP basically a glorified database that locks down your transactional data and your overall data and your compliance and all that stuff, or is it a true system of innovation that's going to drive innovation within your organization? And so I want to distinguish between the two, where system of record is keeping the lights on, giving data a place to live, whereas system of innovation is where AI and advanced analytics can deliver more value. And my argument here is that many companies can layer modern interfaces, or modern platforms, I should say, on a 10 to 20-year-old system rather than enduring a costly rip and replace. So I know that's not popular. It's not a popular common school of thought, but it is something that I think executives and leaders should at least think about, is what are you actually getting by replacing that 5, 10, 20-year-old ERP system that you're using? And yeah, you want to reduce technical debt. You want to modernize. You don't want to be stuck to these old systems that are completely outdated. But there's a fine line between that and prematurely ripping out a system that's working perfectly fine, especially in today's day and age of AI and fast-changing technology, where we don't even know what this market is going to look like in 5 or 10 years. So it's hard to justify a big, massive, risky, expensive, multi-million-dollar, multi-year sort of implementation if we don't know that that's going to be the model that takes us into the future. And so that's the whole thought here, is that, let's rethink rip and replace. And so here's a clip from that. And this is entire interview you can find at episode 229.
So Gartner still reports that more than 70% of ERP initiatives fail to meet their intended objectives. I mean, that's a huge amount, especially when you remember disasters like SPAR's $88 million SAP project collapse. What's even more alarming is that the core problem isn't about the software itself. It's about the chaos inside organizations. According to CIO Africa, data black holes where no one owns the data, accountability is missing, and decision-making is built on shaky ground, are what causes these ERP projects to turn into massive money pits. They argue that failures happen not because ERP platforms can't deliver value, but because organizations don't have the governance, ownership, and the transparency to steer these powerful tools. And that means no matter how advanced your ERP is, if you can't align people, data, and processes, you're headed straight for a black hole. Eric, with this, why do you think ERP projects often spin out of control? Is it leadership, flawed execution? What are some major keys that play into it?
Yeah, great question, great points. It is somewhat of a black hole that these projects end up leading into. But I think the root causes are, sort of ties back to the social media question we just covered a moment ago. But I think the real causes of failure and why these projects spiral out of control is typically it starts with not having a clear plan. A lot of times organizations just rush in, they They hire or select a vendor, contract with the software provider. They contract with the big consulting system integrator, tech consulting firm to design and build the software. And the Army just starts rolling without a clear battle plan. And the smarter organizations, the more effective organizations, take the time to do more of a phase zero, where they have a proper blueprint and understanding of what they want their processes to be, so that they can use that blueprint to drive the software vendor and the implementers rather than the other way around. Now, the software vendors and implementers will say, yeah, we do blueprints, but they're doing it more from the perspective of, we just need answers to design and build software. Whereas, so they need to blueprint the software. You need to blueprint your organization, and you need the two to match, and you need the blueprint for the organization, the business blueprint. You need that to drive the technology blueprint that your software vendor and your system integrator is going to work on. And too many organizations miss that really important point, that really important connection. And then they wonder why, we did a blueprint. I thought we did the implementation planning and the upfront design. Yeah, you did, but you did it to design software that works, not to design a set of business processes and technologies that work for your organization. So those are two very different things. So that planning phase up front is very important, which leads to a second important cause of failure and challenges, which is unrealistic expectations. Too many times organizations think, well, the vendor proposed a 24-month implementation timeline, so it's going to be 24 months. But the reality is, when they put together these proposals, they don't know. I mean, they're basing it on what they think might happen in a perfect world, but they don't know your culture. They don't know how big of a change it's going to be for your business processes and your people. They don't know what your culture is like. There's all these different variables that factor into the implementation time frame, and they're focused more on how long is it going to take us to design and build software, whereas your focus should be how long is it going to take to go through a true business change, a true business transformation that delivers real business value. So those are, again, two very different things that you need to make sure you differentiate between and plan accordingly for. And then I'd say the third big thing that companies miss out on is, again, tied back to one of the earlier social media questions around change management, change readiness, but not having a solid change management strategy and plan, and not starting change management soon enough is a root cause, another root cause of failure, from our opinion, or in our opinion, which leads to a common symptom that I'll mention the symptom only because research shows it's the number one cause of time and budget overruns, and that is decision latency. So decision latency means that organizations take longer to make decisions, and that's what slows the project down. It's not that your tech providers can't design and build fast enough. It's because you can't make decisions fast enough on what you want to be when you grow up, which, again, that's a symptom. But if you go back to why that is, it's because you didn't do the implementation planning up front. You didn't do that business blueprint up front in that phase zero to have that clarity, so that not every single decision is made already, but the major decisions are already made. The major time intensive decisions are made before the army of technical providers start to show up and the meter starts running. So I bring up that one symptom because that's an example of how that symptom ties back to a root cause that you need to address.
For sure. And this all kind of sparks the question for me of, Eric, in a real world example, have you seen like a project where governance and visibility really saved the day for the project, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I've neglected to mention governance, which was really the whole crux of your question and the article it's that you're talking about here. But yes, the governance can save the day, but I would say governance, you don't want to use project governance as a way to fix a problem. You can, but if you put governance in place early on in phase zero, during that implementation planning phase zero phase that I was talking about, you're doing a lot of things in that phase. You should be doing not just the business blueprint I talked about, but it's also defining your change strategy, your architecture strategy, your decommissioning strategy for your different systems, how you're going to integrate multiple systems, what the overall detailed plan is, what the resource plan is for you internally. And then also, not last but not least, is the project governance. What is the overall program management plan going to look like? What are the controls you're going to put in place for how decisions are made, and how you manage scope and time and budget and all that stuff. So that's all really important to get in place up front. Now, if you're already in the midst of a project and you haven't done it, it's better late than never, but now you're playing catch up and you're more on defense trying to clean stuff up, which if that's where you are, that's just the reality of it, and that's okay. But if you have time to influence it and change it, do it earlier, do that program management up front. And that's a big part of what clients hire us to do, is to come in and be an extension of their internal PMO and helping them get the governance and controls in place so that they can manage the overall project. They can manage the vendors, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of slide into our next newsworthy article, which is kind of on the same topic in a way, but something that has been a trend or a big trend in the ERP world for the past years here, and that's been the standard advice of rip out your old system and replace it from scratch. But really, this article is questioning, is that really the smartest way to modernize anymore? According to this insight from Next World, this rip and replace mindset might actually be setting organizations up for more pain than progress. They argue that there's a better way and that you need to think of your ERP as a core that you can extend rather than demolish. Instead of wiping everything clean, the idea is to add modern platforms on top of your existing ERP. That lets you move faster, protect the processes you've already built, and experiment with things like AI or Internet of Things without starting from zero. Plus, with low-code and no-code tools, you can even empower non-technical teams to build workflows and apps themselves, which sounds way less painful than a giant multi-year replacement project. So basically, it's a layered modernization approach that keeps the works, enhance what doesn't work, and then gives yourself a flexible and future-ready foundation. Eric, when should leaders really consider like a rip and replace versus when should they build on top instead? Or what is your opinion on all this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a big dilemma. It's something we are going to unpack in more detail with our guest today, with Greg Benton here after the next break. But in the interim, I'll give you sort of a summary response, and that is, first of all, if you talk to software vendors, ERP software vendors in particular, they're going to tell you, oh, absolutely, you need to rip and replace because that's the way you get innovation. If you rip out the old system, put in a new one, now you've got cloud-enabled, AI-driven functionality, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's true, but that is a lot of pain to go through, and it takes a lot of time and money before you ever get to the point of thinking about innovation. So I like to think of it as like, two phases or two layers of a transformation. You've got your system of record that you're replacing. It's just sort of like just keeping the lights on, having your data, giving your data a place to live, having basic workflows in place, just being able to run the business at a basic level. That's I'll consider that all a system of record. But then system of innovation is where you start thinking, okay, how can we now use AI to make our jobs easier and better? How can we use analytics, advanced analytics? How can we, use some advanced supply chain functionality that we're not taking advantage of now? You need, in one way, you do need that system of record as a base before you can build on that system of innovation or the innovative processes. But the question becomes, do you really need to do that all through your ERP provider? And do you need to go through the pain of ripping out your back office system of record when you could potentially just be looking at other solutions that give you value on what you already have? And basically, whether it's just an interim solution or whether it's a long-term solution, it's still the same point, which is you have to look at the risk reward and cost benefit. For example, if it's going to cost you, if you're using an old legacy system like SAP ECC or Microsoft Dynamics AX or Oracle EBS or whatever it is, let's just say you're using an older legacy system, let's just say it's not a terribly outdated system. If you're on an AS400 or like a green screen still, this does not apply, because in that case, I'd say, yeah, you probably need to get off that and get somewhere in the 21st century, and not be stuck in the 20th century. But assuming where most companies are is they've got systems that have been around for, say, 10 to 20 years. And in most cases, they're not ideal, but they're not broken per se in many cases. But there's a lot of benefit that they're not getting, or a lot of technological value that they're not taking advantage of because they've got these older systems. So that's where you start thinking, well, what if we leave those systems in place, short-term, long-term, whatever, and then we add other platforms or interoperability tools or AI tools that leverage what we have and get immediate value. And that's what a lot of our clients, more and more of our clients are starting to do that, to say, we're going to do ERP, but we're going to wait 3 or 5 years and we're going to sort of flip the script here. And we're going to get immediate value on modern technology without going through tens of millions of dollars, in some cases, tens of millions of dollars to replace that back office system that's not really going to deliver a huge amount of business value. So I think just being agnostic, objective, rational, non-emotional, don't get caught up in the whole, but our system's outdated. Oh, we're not in the latest and greatest cloud system. Oh, we've got technical debt, or, Gartner says that we should do this because, the vendors all sponsored they commissioned a report for Gartner to say they should do this. So you've got to sort of read that stuff, pay attention to it, but don't bet your career on that stuff, because it's very biased stuff that you're getting from the industry. And just do what's right for you and look objectively at what the cost benefit is. It could be that it's a lower cost and potentially lower, it could be lower business value overall, but it might be a higher ROI actually, because your cost and risk is much lower if you just go with more of an incremental improvement to what you have. And it may be that, it buys you some time to kick the can down the road. And maybe 3 or 5 years from now, you start thinking about, okay, now that we've got this value out of this top layer of interoperability or AI or whatever, now we can think about ripping out our old system and replacing it, because we're going to have to eventually. So that's the way I'd look at it.
Yeah. And this also kind of makes me question, have you seen these platform on top strategies succeed in the real world, and what makes or breaks that strategy?
Yeah, we have seen it work. And, I think the key is that you have to have technology that's modern enough to deliver value. Again, if you're, working off a really old iSeries or AS400 mainframe green screen system, and a lot of you listening may not even know what that means, which is okay, because you don't really need to know what it means, because it's going away and it's obsolete. But some companies use really old systems from the 80s and 90s. They're still using those technologies. In those cases, you probably need to upgrade, because that technology is eventually going to break, and you're not going to be able to find anyone in the world that can support it. I hate to say it, I don't want to sound too crass or insensitive, but a lot of these people are dying. Like, people are dying off. That the last of the people that know some of these technologies are literally dying. So it's like, well, you're not training a new generation of kids to learn these old technologies. Eventually, no one's going to be able to support it. So you do have to, at some point, upgrade. So I think that's the way to consider it. And so if you, assuming you're not in that boat though, and you've got a let's call it a semi-modern / semi-outdated system that's 10 or 20 years old, chances are pretty high you've got, as long as your data is solid, and that's a big if, because a lot of companies don't have good data, even with more modern systems. But as long as you've got good data, or you at least get it cleaned up, and as long as you've got a clear strategy to how you're going to do it, doing this interoperability AI layer on top can be very powerful. And that's why companies like Palantir and Snowflake, Databricks, for example, if you follow those 3 companies, they're doing so well right now, because they're taking advantage of the fact that so many companies don't want to, or they can't. Maybe they don't have the budget or the time or the resources to rip out their ERP systems and replace it. So Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, and others are giving these customers lifelines to say, hey, here's another option. Here's a way you can get value and improve your technology stack without necessarily having to spend millions of dollars. So that was number 2 on our list of top 10 interviews of the last year, I should say. And that full discussion, that full episode, can be found at episode 229 of Transformation Ground Control. Just be sure to go to whatever platform you're listening or watching on now, or just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com and look up episode 229 if you want to watch that. So we've got one left, and be curious to hear if any guesses on what you think the number 1 topic might be. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll play you this number 1 interview, and I'll give you a hint. The guest is someone who is on this list from another episode further down the list in this top 10 list. And this was actually the most popular episode, or this interview is from the most popular episode of the last 12 months. And that's based on views, likes, comments, the overall engagement their audience have given. And so this is the number 1 interview. We'll play it for you. We'll tell you what it is right after a quick break.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons that could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 277. This is Eric Kimberling, your host. I'm also CEO of Third Stage Consulting. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. We're up to our number one interview segment of the last 12 months. This is one that goes back almost a full year. It's been close to a year. I think it was July of last year. And so it just barely made the cutoff. My cutoff was the last 12 months. I didn't go back all 5.5 years of this podcast. I just wanted to look at the last 12 months and see which ones were my favorites and which ones had the most popularity with you all, the audience. And this topic, which was very contrarian, is very controversial, and that is that ERP is dying and the software industry is broken. So it's, I don't want to say it's pessimistic. I try to be constructive about this conversation, but it is something that surely struck a nerve in positive and maybe even negative ways for people that are sensitive to the incumbents and work for the incumbents. You might not like this conversation, but most people seem to like and want to debate this topic, which is ERP software dying? Is this industry broken? Are there systemic problems in the industry? And by the way, since this episode aired, I have since published a book that further escalates or further analyzes this conversation to look at the systemic breakdowns in the industry. In fact, if you're watching the video version of this, you can see right over my shoulder here, there's a black book right behind me. It's called Welcome to the Machine. It's a book that just came out in May here of 2026, and it's available now. It talks about how clients, vendors, and consultants all have their own internal biases and dysfunctions that lead to digital transformation failure, and it leads us to the conclusion that this industry, the technology model that we know it today in the business world, is completely broken. And so that was the premise. That's the premise of that book, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it yet, you haven't read it yet, you can learn more about it. Just go to Amazon.com. You can find a link to that book below in the show notes. But this conversation came out before that book, and it actually was one of the sort of pivotal conversations that led me to write the book, to be honest. So this is something I really liked talking about, and it's something that was the most popular episode of the last 12 months. So in this discussion, which by the way had over 2,000 views just on YouTube, but there were thousands more on other platforms, audio only, and LinkedIn, and all the other usual places. But on YouTube, at least, it was the most popular one, far above my typical range for this podcast, and it really debates the status quo head on. And in joining me in this conversation, by the way, is Greg Benton, who's a chief strategy officer at Third Stage, and he was in the number 10 interview segment that we covered earlier in this episode. And in this, Greg reframes death of ERP as an evolution. So ERP is becoming like a living host for a symbiotic data layer that enables interoperability platforms like Palantir, Snowflake, and Databricks to be placed on top of or as a foundation to a new system. So we're focusing more on digital enterprise operations and the overall tech stack rather than just ERP. It's looking at more of an interoperable layer. Composable ERP is a common term that's used. Platforms are becoming more common. So not just investing in an application, but a platform with different applications on that same platform, including the option to custom develop your own if you want to, or have a third party develop it on that common platform. So this episode, or this conversation, really dives into some of the trends towards more composable ERP, moving away from that single one-size-fits-all monolithic model. So it's a great conversation. I'd love to hear your comments on this topic as well. But in the meantime, let's play a clip from this episode number 229 with Greg Benton, where I talk about how ERP, as we know it, is dying. From your perspective, what are the biggest forces that are or could be driving companies away from traditional monolithic ERP systems? You just talked about, speed to value being one, but are there other trends that you're seeing that are causing clients, and we've got a couple that you and I have talked about, where they've sort of put off their ERP initiative and accelerated, move forward other enterprise technology initiatives. But what's driving this? What are some of the other things that are driving that trend?
Well, organizational risk, and also the capital T in transformation really assumes that you're going to change some of those, in many cases, 20, 30-year-old processes that are outdated, that are manual, that are highly risky for the organization. And this will allow you to really just back up a little bit. We get called in many times to restart or re-engineer a quote failed ERP implementation. And in so doing, you have to back up and perform really a phase zero, getting the organization ready for that move, and then reducing risk in the move, also making it so that everyone's on board with the changes that are coming, that are going to be a benefit to them, that are going to be a benefit to the organization from a financial standpoint, and modify some of those old processes so that you're now optimized in the way that your software systems actually control the processes. They actually put a security barrier around the way that those processes work in your organization. And that really is what's driving this look at how can we get started with the interoperability hub, or kind of the mission control as the foundation, and then build on top of that with a composable ERP. So the enterprise systems surround that core. And that's really what people are looking for right now. Reducing risk, reducing cost, and producing some immediate time to value in the reporting and the BI that's available to you within months, instead of at the end of the entire process, right?
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, makes total sense. And I agree with you. Those are some important drivers that are causing some people to rethink their strategies. Not everyone is going to fit into any one path, but it's again important to know what your options are. Here's a comment from Tom on LinkedIn. Says resource planning will never become obsolete. The combination of platforms, technology, software, and business processes involved will continue to undergo constant change and improvement. And then
absolutely agree with that, by the way. I mean, think about the move for ERP vendors to hyperscaling technologies on the computing side, being able to scale to any level, being able to orchestrate different applications and load balancing along the way, right? So that was one area where it took it out of the internal data center, so to speak, and moved it into these multi-tenant cloud platforms. The advent of AI, and I remember that in 2017, Infor, among others, introduced, in their case, Coleman, which was an AI system that allowed for a lot of queries to go on within Infor applications. What's happening now is all of the ERP systems are moving to an AI that's really interchangeable with other systems. So it's moving toward this interoperability platform as well. And they're developing those very rapidly and making it a part of that multi-tenant rollout of their newest technologies. So it is evolving even within those enterprise systems.
Right.
Is the point.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And here's a comment from X. Someone says, I enjoy ERP Next open source. Another open source alternative to traditional monolithic ERP systems, much like Odoo, but ERP Next is an alternative to Odoo if you're looking for open source types of systems. Tom on LinkedIn really likes your term digital enterprise operations. He says it's an excellent candidate term to replace the increasingly ambiguous term ERP. I think the word
I love that, Tom. You know,
great minds think alike.
EO. If ERP, if anything about ERP is dead, enterprise resource planning as a term that covers, everything, the ubiquitous enterprise systems is dead. Digital enterprise operations is really what we're talking about. And that encompasses kind of the strategy and business case for moving to something new, right? So you're following a blueprint, hopefully, as an organization that takes you through the next 3, 7, and even 10 years in that entire transformation journey. So DEO is a much more apt term for what we're talking about now.
Love that. And I don't know about you, but I'd be okay if we retired the terms ERP and digital transformation for that matter. We use it. We're just
or the digital part of digital transformation, right?
Yeah, just call it transformation or business transformation, or I don't know. There's got to be something better, but DEO might be it. Maybe that's the replacement. I know we've sort of used that increasingly over the years, and we'll see if it catches on here as a new. That's just what we need. Those another buzzword. Then people say, well, DEO is getting overused and it's too ambiguous. We need another term. So, but I think it's a good potential replacement there.
Well, hey, I'm just getting used to using the term cloud. So
right,
yeah.
Right, and soon that'll be obsolete too because everything will be in the cloud. So you won't have to specify that it's cloud because that's just
won't think of it. Yeah,
exactly. Raj on YouTube says AI will more likely evolve as a management tool within ERP initially at level 0. Enterprise resource is a must pillar of any ERP system. Hard to conceive the death of ERP. So I think you're right. I tend to agree with that. I don't think SAP will be dead in 5 years or anything like that. But I do think, my personal opinion is that maybe not so much Oracle or Microsoft just because they're such diversified companies outside of traditional ERP. But I think SAP in particular is at risk of becoming the next Bond. The software that comes and goes, and there's a new incumbent that takes over. Sort of that top spot. I don't think SAP will be there in the long term. It's just my personal opinion that a lot of that's just based on the product, the strategy, the way they pursue their go-to-market, the way the goodwill they're losing in the market right now. I think they remind me of BlackBerry right before Apple came out with the iPhone.
Wow.
It's sort of like the hubris and the arrogance behind, ERP will never die. Our product is amazing. Monolithic ERP, long live monolithic ERP without recognizing some of these other trends. I think that will lead to the downfall of SAP. But I'd love to hear if anyone agrees or disagrees with me. I'm sure many of you both agree and disagree with me. So I'd love to hear your comments. Will SAP be dead in the future? That's another question for you there. Here's an interesting question, and it's bringing up a really good point that is relevant to this alternative to ERP that we're talking about. This again is from Tom on LinkedIn. Tom says, will dominant ERP players see business opportunity in playing well with others, reversing the trend and temptation to promote vendor lock-in? So let's talk about vendor lock-in. That's a hot topic.
Gosh, Tom is just really hitting it, right? So
Tom's on fire. We need Tom on every live stream. Every time we do these live, we need Tom on there just because he's rolling now.
So working with the major ERP vendors, and over the last, call it 5 to 10 years, we've seen a shift that they used to be selling into the marketplace with a go-to-market strategy of implementing a monolithic ERP system and a single ERP system, and adding more of the bolt-ons or edge solutions to that so that people didn't have to go somewhere else. That's really changed over the last couple of years with a number of these ERP vendors that I won't name, because then I'll skip somebody and somebody will get mad at me. But they are playing nicely in the sandbox now. So if you have somebody that's running core financials and supply chain, and they're together in a best of breed solution with, all right, I'll mention one, a Workday HCM solution. Those two used to be kind of combative in terms of wanting to be the single ERP system. Anymore, I think that they actually work together very well. The integration and APIs between the two can be developed with Snowflake, Databricks, or even other systems that come with AWS and Azure. So that best of breed or composable ERP or digital enterprise operations is facilitated by the new tools that are available. And, that is the trend. That is the trend we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like the strategy that some vendors are doing to sort of leverage both, almost like they're sort of in the middle. They are providing this traditional semi-monolithic ERP option, but they're also layering on top of that other option. So I think of like Salesforce, I think has been really good at this over the years. And even now, Microsoft's been good at it with D365. I think NetSuite is starting to catch on to this too. So those are 3 examples right there: NetSuite, Microsoft, and Salesforce. They are all, you could call them semi-traditional ERP or enterprise tech off-the-shelf systems, but they've also built these platforms and the opportunity for third-party developers to create apps on top of their platform. So now you get a core ERP system, but you're not beholden just to that one system. You're not locked in necessarily just to the limitations of that one system. Now you can go to third parties and look at other bolt-ons. And Microsoft's done this forever. They've got the whole ISV
Microsoft model. Is the pioneer.
Yeah. And whereas SAP and to a lesser degree Oracle have been sort of the other extreme, where it's been more of a closed environment, more of a greenfield, building everything from the ground up, which was a strength for SAP in particular for a long time, but I think it's becoming a liability now in terms of flexibility and adaptation. Now customers are getting too locked into SAP, I think, and we'll see how that unfolds in the coming years. It's a great point from Tom. Another question from X. Question is more of a comment, but I'm curious to hear what you think, Greg. But the comment here is, in my opinion, ERP vendors need to be mindful of pricing themselves out of the market of the future. And it sort of ties into that vendor lock-in thing too. Once you get locked in by the vendor, they can pretty much do whatever they want in these cloud subscription environments as far as price escalations, cost increases, things like that. And I think they'll keep doing it. They'll keep pricing it up until enough customers push back and cry uncle, or whatever the saying is. So what are your thoughts on this? Are ERPs
or if enough alternatives are provided? So if we have more of the interoperability platforms that come to the fore, many of the processes that are managed or automated by a single ERP system, or really that monolithic idea, can now be controlled and managed in a bidirectional manner by the interoperability platforms. And so I think they're not going to get maybe priced out of the market, but part of it's going to be deployed out of the market. When you've got a 30, 60, 90-day deployment window for a Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, and I just say those right off the top of my head. That doesn't compare with spending 6 months to a year to 18 months to deploy and put in a new software system. So the cost of the implementation, the time of the implementation, and the time to value is what is going to push them out of the market, or at least push alternatives to the fore, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You look at, we were talking about Odoo and ERP Next. I mean, that's how they burst into the scene, as they took advantage of the fact that the pricing was so expensive and on some of these ERP systems, and they offered a lower cost option. In the case of, I know for a fact Odoo, and I think ERP Next as well, just as two examples, they offer this sort of freemium option where you can actually get your hands on the software. You can try it for free. And then as you add modules or users, then you start paying. But they've sort of disrupted the market in that way. And I think there's other disruptors that are other disruptions happening now, and others that we don't even know about yet that are forthcoming. One thing I want to share with the audience too, just while we're talking about this, is we're talking a lot about trends and where the enterprise tech space is headed and how you should be thinking about your digital strategies. I'm going to include a link or a QR code right here, top left corner of your screen. We'll include the link below in the comments or in the description. But if you want to download our digital transformation report, it's an annual report we publish each year, and it contains a number of industry trends, best practices, just what we're seeing in the industry. And it also contains a number of independent tech agnostic reviews of different software options that are out there. So I highly encourage you to check that out. It's free. You can get it on our website. Just scan the QR code here on the screen and you can get that.
Hey, Eric, while people are there too, please check out the Stratosphere conference that we have coming up in August, the 25th through the 27th in Denver. And that really is an opportunity to get one-on-one discussions going, to meet many of the ERP vendors that will also be there. The only rule is they can't really sell their systems. They have to be talking about what's coming in terms of their technology and roadmaps, right? So getting right to the heart of this whole question about ERP and the evolution into DEO. And there's going to be a lot of that discussion with thought leaders, people like Jan Bond, who are going to be there talking about, I always call Jan the kind of the godfather of ERP, but that tells you the caliber of the people that we will have speaking and interacting at this conference in Denver. So,
yeah, I'll while we're talking here, I'll flash a QR code for that as well in just a moment. Partially because I have to create it here while we're talking, which I'm terrible at multitasking. So let me come back to that. I'll wait till you're talking again, and then I'll create it. But just coming back to the some of the comments here on social media. Dan on LinkedIn says, I like Tom's new name for ERP, but I would add the word platform for the description because we're talking about an all-encompassing tool. Great point. Totally
we have an option that we've been exploring for about the last 4 or 5 years here at Third Stage, called Platform Select. And it's no longer about just selecting an ERP system. It's about selecting that entire digital enterprise operations picture, right? And moving into a phase 0 that prepares an organization. And we actually call that Platform Select. So I love your idea of thinking about platforms rather than maybe just application sets or systems as well. Yep.
Yeah. Andy, I think this is in reference to when we were talking about the renaming of ERP and digital transformation. Andy on LinkedIn says, exactly. We have been digital for quite some time. And then Middo on YouTube says, functions in an ERP, managing foundational data, integrating disparate business functions, and enforcing structured processes remain essential, and AI can be made to act as a powerful layer on top. I often wonder if, do you think ERP systems in general will evolve into more of a true system of record / database, glorified database, and then AI ends up becoming what ERP used to be in terms of reporting and BI and that sort of thing? Because now if you think about it, you don't necessarily need to, even some of the systems we're using internally at Third Stage, and we see it with our clients too, but even systems we're using now, you've got the conversational AI interface where now I don't have to go into our CRM to run a report to see how many deals you're working on or whatever. I can just ask it, tell me the last 10 deals we closed, or show me the last 10 opportunities that popped into the pipeline or whatever. So is that something you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. I mean, think about this. If you were to look back a year ago and people were talking about ChatGPT, would you have seen that as a tool that would be indispensable to you today? Like I think it is for many people, right? We use it just kind of out of convenience, basically out of a need to really assess things very quickly and put that into writing, especially in emails, things like that. I think the same thing is happening with ERP systems. They've all got a user interface now that is more conversational. That's more like Alexa or Siri, that type of interface. And I think that'll continue to grow and expand, making it easier to essentially analyze your business, get reporting out, do all of the functions that used to be proprietary to that single ERP system. And now you're going to be able to do it through multiple ERP systems, multiple edge solutions within your enterprise. I think that's definitely the way it's going.
Yeah.
And it's growing rapidly. I mean, I said, think about a year ago with ChatGPT. Think about a year from now with enterprise systems. They're evolving that quickly. So,
yeah, it's a good way to put it, because I know 2 years ago when I first started using ChatGPT, I thought it was cool, but I didn't fully recognize or realize how ingrained it would be in my day-to-day life. Now I use it, I'd say hourly. I mean, I'd be surprised if there's an hour that goes by in my day that I'm not using ChatGPT or AI in some way, just to, leverage time and effort and things like that. So that is the number one interview segment of the last 12 months. It was with Greg Benton. That's from episode 229. And if you'd like to listen to the full discussion, which is a really good one, that whole episode was really good, based on engagement and just my own personal preference. But the audience seemed to really like it too. You can find that by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. Look for episode 229. You can listen to or watch the whole thing there, or whatever platform you're listening to or watching on now with this episode. Just go search up 229. You'll find it there. So love to know what you think. Which interview did you like best? What topic did we not cover in this top 10 list that you'd like to hear more of? Or what topic have you not heard on this podcast that you'd like to hear more of? I also encourage you to check out transformationgroundcontrol.com to look at all the past episodes and see what topics are out there that you maybe missed or might be interested in. So check that out. Transformationgroundcontrol.com is where you can find all those episodes, and really look forward to getting some more interviews going next week. But in the meantime, hope you have a great week. We'll see you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.